No problem. Well, we can get started and have some discussions first, and then when they come in, because we did plan on having 4 to 5 speakers, and we have 3, so we have plenty of time for discussion. And I'm just going to let Karen Moe introduce the session. I'm Dave Jones, one of the co-chairs of the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster, and I'm joined with Karen Moe, who's the other co-chair. And Karen, go ahead. You can start to kick off the session.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Dave, and welcome everyone. We really designed this session to recognize the impact of the pandemic on the work of people throughout the communities dealing with disaster response. And I've really been thinking about the disasters life cycle cluster here in ESIP, recognizing that I think we started it like 8 years ago, and there's been evolution in a variety of areas. And Dave and I had been talking about really using today's session to focus where we go, especially since we're in so many new aspects. We've got this new way of meeting. I don't think this is going to go away, even when we're able to, travel and meet again. That this kind of capability and interaction style is pretty powerful. And when we're trying to resolve some of these issues, and when you get to, helping people respond to disasters, recover, and be better prepared for disasters, you're going to be interacting with a number of different communities. And I've found myself focusing a lot on citizen scientists and really just the public, and ways that, we can make the public better understand what's happening, understand the science, and trust it. And trust the science is so important. And it's the dichotomy that we're seeing in our country today makes that really difficult. So I'm kind of hoping that we have built into the schedule some time after each of these sessions to get feedback on what are the takeaways. And part of that is what is it that we need to continue looking at doing, because I think that I'm pretty passionate about disaster response in that whole community, and ways to keep it alive, and certainly making data matter in that realm is critical. So we will have opportunities, and while we're going through this first session is looking at more of the public side of our partnership, and when we get our speakers in, and then in the second part,
Hello.
The ESIP data providers and some of the data sources that they have, and the techniques available that we want to be able to support our disasters communities will be in the second half. So 2 different looks, considering how the pandemic has made things more difficult, more challenging, but disruptive technologies, it's definitely breaking open our world for new ways of doing things. And I think there's a lot of good in that as well. So I'll be focusing on capturing notes, but I do invite everyone to go into the Kiko chat. There's the notes area there, and feel free to contribute your own ideas and notes. And that when we have the Slido questions, there'll be an opportunity to submit comments. And I think we're also going to be using the chat. I'll be keeping the chat open and watching that for comments and questions. So let me to Dave. I don't know if we're ready to go with our speakers yet, but
yeah, well, I see Tom has joined. Greg, have you joined?
Greg is on.
Greg is on. Awesome. Sorry, guys. I must have given you the wrong Zoom link, but since ESIP is so flexible, Aaron was right on it and set the other link. Is David? Have you joined us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. And Tom is here as well. So awesome. We have our three speakers. So we'll get right into it. I just wanted to say that first of all, I'm gonna turn on my little camera phone because I want everybody to see that I have on my shirt that I got
All I see is Karen smiling.
years ago.
Am I supposed to see?
Yeah. So let's see. There we
Oh,
go.
and now I see Dave in his
There you go.
pajamas. No, what?
Okay.
I am an official part of the Federation. The year this shirt is, I think, 15 years old. But it has been washed, so that's good. I did want to welcome everybody to this session. We're going to be joined by some incredible speakers. As Karen said, it's all about COVID-19, the challenges we've seen in data, accessing data, processing data. How can we use it to get to decision makers? And how can we really accelerate trusted data? Because we've been talking a lot in the disaster lifecycle cluster about how can you trust data. We all know there's a lot of information out there, but some of us might not know that we have to make big decisions and we might be accessing data from, some 12-year-old kid who just figured out how to publish stuff versus some real science information. And while we might be able to detect that difference, decision makers may not. So we've had a lot of challenges out there, and we know that we have great partners like NASA, NOAA, USGS, EPA, a lot of those folks that are gathering great data, processing great science data. But how do we distinguish between the trusted data and the data that we're not so sure about, and then accelerate the use of that trusted data into decision-making environments? And we work very closely with all those agencies, and also with Tom Moran at the All Hazardous Consortium. Tom's going to be joining us in just a second. But I'd first like to start with Dr. David Green, who is at NASA's Applied Sciences Division. And David runs the disasters program. And he has invited me over the last several weeks to participate in an interagency call and video meeting, talking about various agencies and what data that they have. And so I think this is really relevant. I'm looking forward, David, to your remarks. And at the same time, further down in this session, we'll pull up a Slido poll because we have a number of questions that we would like everybody that's logged in and participating in this session to join. And hopefully we'll even have some time to get into a breakout session for about 5 minutes so you can meet each other quickly and come up with an answer to some of the questions. So David, you can take and share your screen and pull up your presentation, and it's a go. You have about 10 minutes or so. I'll keep you on.
Okay. Time. Can you let me know?
We cannot see your screen yet.
Not see my screen.
We see David Green.
David, are you by chance joining just from the browser?
Yeah, does it not work from the browser?
Yeah, it doesn't. The sharing I heard is not as great from the browser.
Okay, so David has given me his slides.
Okay, so David,
you want to just then I'll just tell you to.
That would be perfect.
Yeah, if you
someone
could
else want to do it, and then.
Yeah, when you're ready to change slides, David, just go beep. I'm just kidding. Just tell me whatever you want to do.
Okay. All right. So if you want to load them up,
yeah,
or take the screen or whatever you need to do.
Yep.
And while you're doing that, perhaps I can start.
Yeah, go ahead and start.
So, so thank you to Dave, to Karen, to the ESA Federation and the Disasters Cluster. The issue and issues that ESA has always championed about access to data, quality of data, and increasingly the trust of data is something really dear to my heart and to the program that I'm currently running. And I'm the lead for NASA's Disasters and Risk Reduction Program, which sits and resides within the Earth Science program at NASA. So can you see the screen now? I can see it here.
You should be able to see it, and you're breaking up just a little bit. I'm not sure.
Oh,
So
okay. I don't
wonder
know.
if everybody else could turn off cameras, and we might, it just might be a bandwidth issue. So if you can turn off your
Perhaps.
cameras for now, if you're not talking, and hopefully, David, your audio will get a little bit better.
Okay. Please just interrupt if I need to repeat or change something. So again, thank you to everyone. The topic here of data access, trust, and turning data into information that people can use is something very important to my program and to the efforts I support. If we go to the next slide, Dave. So I lead the disasters program, and the title of the ESIP sessions on making data matter is really what we're focused on. Data alone does not drive decisions, but it's data in combination with people and decision makers and partners and a variety of tools that can transform. But COVID has accelerated many of our efforts. It's challenged the availability of standards and it redefined interoperability. And as I'm going to talk about, it also revealed that there were gaps in the ability of communities to come together, even when the technologies and the data might exist. Let's go to the next slide. Well, some have asked about why NASA. So NASA obviously is a satellite agency, but it also promotes the free and open access to data. It is an independent agency, and it has global reach. And I would argue it is a trusted science agency. And the ability to have trusted data and trusted products benefits from having a long-standing reputation of being open and transparent and having a legacy and accountability for the information you post and share. Recently, NASA partnered with the European Space Agencies and the Japanese Space Agency to establish a COVID Earth observing portal that's on here. It was to combine Earth observations from 3 trusted organizations to share information on a perspective that others may not be able to have. In the sense of building trust, we also recognize that sometimes it's a student, sometimes it is someone in a university or someone in the private sector or many others who can contribute to solutions. So we have mechanisms beyond the organized authorities, such as reaching out through what we call the Space Apps Challenge, reaching hundreds of communities and countries. And we actually issued a challenge to the world on what the applications are that would address COVID. So there's a number of novel ways of building trust and drawing on a variety of trusted partners. Let's go to the next. Now, one of the things, Dave, can you change it? Thank you. So one of the things we also did is very often it's trying to put information in the context. And so an image or a data set alone is not enough. You need to start looking at how do you put the stories together. So like many others, during COVID, we turned to geospatial information, tools, and analytics. For our case, we had examples of showing how to combine things that were changing in the air with what was changing in the population, with what was changing in the land. And while the stories were an effective tool, the ability to get it into standard platforms and make it available, helped the ownership for many others to take advantage. But it still probably wasn't enough. So let's go to the next slide. One of the things we heard is that in order to address a COVID type situation, there were many partners that needed to be brought around the table. Mechanisms to share data is not the same as mechanisms to share knowledge. So we needed to come up with ways of creating new dialogues, new tools to bring a variety of organizations and disciplines and geographies together to look at how did we get here historically, what was going on in the present. And one of the things we found that very few people were even looking over the horizon as to what was going to be happening potentially next. Let's go to the next slide. So what we did is we created with NASA, using somewhat of our leverage as a trusted organization, to reach across federal agencies, UN organizations, humanitarian groups, local, private sector. And we created a ability to launch challenges and discussions to solve solutions in a collaborative, ongoing dialogue. So on here are representatives of people and organizations that came together every week for about 14 to 16 weeks. We took a break. We actually are reconvening again next Tuesday, bringing partners to basically come together to pose challenges, offer solutions, and build activities or projects or opportunities to move and advance things forward. Let's go to the next slide. So obviously, one thing that came to mind is we have people working on communicating storms and weather, and that is not going to stop while COVID is going on. So one of the things that became very clear is that we were dealing with compounded situations. And I can tell you, very few people from the different communities were prepared to address a compounded situation and realized that we were in the spring about to enter hurricane season, about to enter tornado season, about to see floods and droughts, food shortages, transportation changes, school closures, and everything else. Let's go to the next. Bloomberg was one of the groups that we talked to, the media. They were looking at, well, what's going on with the economy? Well, one of the things we found is we've got a lot of data and expertise in earth science, but we don't often connect it with the economic data or the economic projections. And they were already having this dialogue about, we were expecting the first rise and fall, and then almost like a tsunami, there are going to be additional waves. Next slide. In our dialogues, we looked at social vulnerability. It's not just the hazards of the disease vector and the storm, but the society factors of vulnerability have to be included. Next slide. We needed to look at state level, and what we saw was internal information that many of us had to have, even a private company. Internal information, inward facing, and other information, outward facing. How are we going to do that? And again, maintain a trust and a certain level of transparency or share ability to collaborate. Next slide. We saw that states were challenged, and as things went forward, we realized that not only were airplanes vectors for this disease, but as people were mobile for their jobs or for their schools or for their roads, that the disease was tracking our transportation networks. And all of a sudden, we had epidemiologists, environmentalists, transportation officials, all having to talk and work with each other in a way they'd never done before. Next slide. So the opportunity and challenges here were open data, using cloud, using technologies, but finding ways that were sustainable and accessible. We're still trying to figure out some of the things we've cobbled together for COVID, whether they're going to be sustainable. We've identified some common ways to process information and some common platforms. Part of it also is how do we translate that and visualize that to all these different communities that our suppliers are not overwhelming a whole host of users in ways that they've never anticipated or visualized before. I'll have a few more and then I'll stop and open up discussion and pass to my partners. So the health crisis was really a stress test for all of us at ESIP and many others to how do we cooperate and learn. It exposed some strengths as well as some of our weaknesses. And this uncertainty that continues should be looked at as both an opportunity because people are finding clever solutions and building trust where there wasn't an opportunity to create trust previously. Next. In order to do that, bringing data together, bringing people together, we now need to demonstrate things. We've talked to Dave and Dean here from OGC and others. So we need to address exposure, the vulnerability, the ability to cope with all this information, to move the information across our lifelines, and to address all of these components. What we're trying to do now, in many ways, is find ways to come together to actually implement. So that's when I talk about projects. Not so much that these are long-term research. These are immediate needs to bring together with defined deliverables and defined demonstrations. Let's go to the next. I'll just rapidly go through. There's been no shortage of portals that stood up. Next. So from FEMA to HHS to, just keep going, Dave, to a variety of partners in the group of Earth observations, to the humanitarian Red Cross and others. No shortage of hubs and portals. But now we need to demonstrate with stakeholders that this information is ready to use. And as I said before, one of the things that we didn't see a lot of, because people were dealing with the situation in real time, was starting to look over the horizon. So one of the things that we really need to look on is not just trusted information that's now, but trusted information that is also predictive. I think I'll stop there.
That sounds great, David. Thanks so much. This is a great way to start this, and I'd like to move now to Greg. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to share your screen if you're going through the web, but we can certainly try if you have your slides up and ready to go. Do you want to try to share?
Yeah, sure. Let me try and see if I can share some of these here.
Okay.
Also, a reminder, if you have questions or comments for David Green, if you want to put those in the chat, that's a great place for them as we go.
That's great. Thanks, Aaron, for saying that. Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions as well. So if you're thinking of them, just put them in the chat and we can read through them when we're getting to the question and answer period after Tom Moran's presentation. You able to share?
Why don't you pull yours up? I'm kind of muddling through some of this here. So.
Okay. I don't know. Did you send me your slides, Craig?
I just recently did.
You did? Okay. All right. I can pull them up. Let me just, yep, I see them. Hold on a second. I'll just pull them up and share it if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Can everybody see my slides?
I can see them just fine. How about everybody else?
Yep, we can see them.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, folks. Greg McShane. I'm with Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. Specifically, I am in the Integrated Operations Division under Strategy, Policy, and Resources. For the previous 14 years, I was in the National Infrastructure Coordinating Center, more on the technical and facility side. I guess I'm more getting on the strategy side and implementation, which I've always been doing, implementing new capability, whether it's facility build outs, operational build outs, in upgrading tools and technology from web EOC to our situation awareness tools, to integration into some of our more business workflows with ServiceNow and some of the other capabilities within CISA that we're rolling into. I'm also very much involved in some of our data strategy. I'm on the data council for CISA. We're very much integrated with overall DHS. DHS sets a lot of the policy, so does CISA, and they don't really tell you how to do it, but that's part of my job and how we implement new technology, data sets, and apply that to our watch operations and our overall mission. So as far as IOD, we don't have an official org chart yet. I've seen it on Teams presentation, but it's we just broke it out from to our CISA watch, combined watch operations, which is now called CISA Central. That also includes our ESF functions number 2, communications, and then 14, which is fairly new, our cross-sector business and infrastructure, which we're very much building out new capability for that. And also IOD rolls all of our regional offices into one, our intel under this one umbrella, and as well as our operational planning, readiness, and continuity. Next slide, Dave. So as for a little bit more background, again, IOD combines all the cyber NKIC, the former NICC and NCC under one umbrella. This is more kind of a takeaway for you to see all the former names and what our new name is. And we are now at central@cisa.gov. That's how the best way to get to us. We're a one-stop shop with our service desk, supporting all of our physical and cyber operations. Next slide, Dave. Again, this is more of a little bit more background on our Presidential Policy Directive 21. Again, it still covers, next slide, Dave, still covers a lot of our central core functions and capabilities, our situation awareness, information sharing, assessments and analysis, decision support, and planning operations. Next slide, Dave. Some of our goals really kind of falls into some of those same things we've been talking about. It's the real-time information. It's the situational awareness into one system. It's taking all the social media, news, CISA data sets from all of our assessments, partner notifications, and then assessing all that information and putting it into that report and getting that out to our partners efficiently, effectively. It's the constant monitoring, it's the constant assessment, it's the triage assessment of information, data, and then pulling in what is the ground truth that we're looking for and what can we report on. We've been leveraging a lot of the ESRI capabilities from our CI dashboards, geospatial capabilities from ESRI. We've been leveraging GeoCollaborate to share a lot of our information in a secure manner, which really supports that initial triage evaluations of the incident reports. Some of the other data feeds and sources that we're supporting the lifeline sector, as well as all of our assessment dependency data in our CISA gateway. We do have a number of dependency type tools we're leveraging for our analytical capabilities, our national response NRMC folks that do all those harder long-term analysis and coordination. They produce a lot of our infrastructure outlook reports, which are very, very popular. This is a capability that not a lot of organizations do. So folks are always looking for that next forecast of what's going to happen with that specific sector or critical infrastructure. I'm really happy to say that lately we've been working a lot with Idaho National Labs, some of the interagency states and private sector partners, and developing some of those tools, capabilities, solutions to particular problem sets related to ESF2 and 14, specific to supply chain, fiber cuts, transportation. One of those was with really the event of COVID. It really presented an opportunity for us to solve some of those things we've been trying to solve right now. Something like a COVID really does accelerate that urgency. We've got a lot of people now at the table to solve those problems. So you've got the right people, the right data, and the right technology. And one of those examples, and Tom's going to get into a lot of this, and we're going to really have kind of a back and forth with this. And we've been doing this a lot with the All Hazardous Consortium. We're on the Friday calls, and it's this commercial routing application. And we developed that with Idaho National Labs, the All Hazardous Consortium, and recently addressing a lot of the DOT capabilities that they're looking to add on, as well as kind of take a step back and look where do we go next with some of this capability here. So again, Dave, you can run through some of the other slides, but it's really focused on some of the near real-time situational awareness, our approach to doing some of these. It's the development and sharing process that we are building off of. Again, it's a little challenging here now that we're all under one umbrella. We're working on, combining that watch log from cyber or physical to the service desk on all those that information and data that we are getting from our partners. That's not only sometimes required by policy, but it's also voluntary as well. And we work with a lot of our partners and do real well with a lot of that. Some of the other challenges with a COVID-19, I'm on slide 10, Dave, is the information overload. It's just a high volume, multiple data sources. What's real? What's not real? What's really important? What's the data confidence of that information that you've got coming in? We've worked a lot with All Hazardous Consortium to develop that operational readiness level and to measure that data confidence. And more and more as we build that library, we can leverage that in understanding the data coming in. And when we build our briefs and reports and we send that up to our leadership, there's a level of confidence when we make that recommendation to leadership. So again, some of the COVID opportunities that presented themselves, that's pretty obviously, we're on Zoom right now. CISA's kind of shunned off of that initially, but I think they've come back with some of their security upgrades. But Teams, we've leveraged Office 365 like we've never before. We've migrated to SharePoint Online, integrated with Teams, with some of our email capabilities. And on the geospatial front, it's leveraging those additional data layers and sharing them through GeoCollaborate and the S3 Hub with those folks like within FEMA. But basically on slide 11, this has been our approach. We're trying to nail down, what are those top 10 data sources that we leverage from our watch operations, and how do we implement that into our tools and capabilities. We have a third-party vendor, Data Capable, which feeds a lot of our data into our situation awareness tools from social media, from news, from a lot of those open source news and data sets, and they categorize them. We've taken that use case approach. What's the problem we're trying to solve, and what data do we have, and how can we best put that into a dashboard or a metric so that our watch analysts can understand. So again, it goes back to the monitoring and assessment. It's the event information, the population impacts, infrastructure impacts, what news is out there, what's that ground truth, and what tying back to those data sets that we've gotten, what's authoritative, what's not. So with that, I want to just kind of close on that, Dave. Again, we're working closer with our regions, our protective security advisors out there, our cyber security advisors, and it's really coming together quite nicely. And CISA, with the current 2020 reorg, of course, in the middle of a pandemic, is really positioning itself to be that much more successful. Again, some of the challenges with COVID coming forth is, how do we do this, and how do we do that remotely, virtually? How do we do this? When do we get back? We do have a hybrid of folks. We still have folks on our watch floor, but they're socially distanced. It's not everybody, but it's some folks. There's a level of information and data that you still need access to in the office. So with that, on some of the next steps on slide 17, Dave, it's those additional authoritative information data sources, things like imagery, video. How do we set this up so that we can be that much more successful integrating with and supporting some of those ESFs? when we're down at the NRCC at FEMA supporting the event response. How do you respond to an event, during a pandemic? So it changes up a lot of the dynamics. You can't physically have somebody in the state EOC, but maybe there's some way we can hybrid that or on the ground boots that can work for the response part of it. It'll be interesting and hopefully, knock on wood, that hurricane doesn't come through, but we've already had I think 10 already, and not to the level that we ever want to see, but it's those types of things. How do we better process RFIs? We stood up our crisis action team for COVID it was a virtual one, first one ever, for responding to a lot of the COVID inquiries and responses. So again, we're looking at some of those other different things, and some of the events that are up and coming from election systems monitoring, and how we actually do that in November. So more to come. Let me turn it back to you, Dave, and I'm open to any comments, questions, unless you want to just save it for the roundtable.
No, thanks. I think this has been terrific, Greg. I really appreciate it. And while I'm getting Tom's slides up, I just wanted to ask you, how do agencies like NASA, how does that data play into any of your situational awareness and decision making activities?
Well, I know that NASA has quite a bit of data imagery that they do share. I know they share it through some of the NRCC, and how we get that is through some of the ESF desks. Where I think we could work closer is exactly that. Where we do some of our own imagery on the DHS side. I think it's CBP, but not to the level of NASA and not to the level of capability that they do have. So from flooding modeling, those types of things, I'm sure our NRMC folks are very much involved in that, closing the loop with NASA and those specific data sets. But that's open for discussion, because I think there's an opportunity there, and getting the right people at the table would be fantastic.
That sounds great, Greg. Thanks very much. And Tom, I want to bring you into the picture. Tom's the executive director. Tom Moran is the executive director of the All Hazards Consortium. And he's been doing a terrific job really pulling together private and public sector partnerships to really bring private sector data into the public sector and vice versa. So Tom, I'm going to pull up your slides, and as soon as you see them, you should be ready to go.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
Okay. There we go. So first, let me just say hello and again to our ESIP partners, Dave and Karen Moe and I speak weekly, but it's always great to be back supporting our partners. And I heard a rumor Aaron is stepping down, but hopefully not going too far away. I haven't had a chance to meet the new director yet, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity with ESIP and the All Hazards Consortium and federal and state agencies as we go forward. So what is the All Hazards Consortium, and what do we do? The consortium is a 501c3 nonprofit. It really is evolved over the years, and now has become kind of a public-private operational problem-solving entity. It uses its legal framework to protect information, so everything goes on inside the consortium, or the SICE, the Sensitive Information Sharing Environment, which is a framework, is protected. It's protected from media, from FOIA requests, all that stuff. Why? Because of trust. Trust is fundamental to sharing information and really solving problems together between industry and government, especially with state government. So we watch for problems. We have committees that organize around them called use case committees. They have a very fast process of how to bring common agreement around the problem, the impacts of the problem, the people to be involved, the data to be shared, the sensitivity of that data, and then the solutions that come behind it. So Dave asked me to speak about COVID. I think David Green mentioned on an earlier call, COVID really brought everybody to the forefront. I can't tell you how many calls I was on that just things were getting done at a rapid pace. And somebody asked one panelist during one of the webinars, why do you suppose it so happened? I said, well, it's kind of like what happened with us during Sandy or anything else. You know, people are at risk. People are dying. The people that want to fix things really emerge, and they really work together, and they bring the naysayers actually into the kitchen with them and make believers out of them for a period of time, right, to fix stuff. So COVID for us was an opportunity to address things that we normally never see. We weren't really going to activate for this until it got into the information sharing component. So let me show you exactly what happened. Let's go to the next slide, Dave. So COVID on the left, you'll see on the diagram, COVID was the problem. So at 6 o'clock, the private sector and states all needed reliable information. So they put a group together, about 30 people. They looked at all the information sites that were out there, and using our operational readiness level standard, which we developed in partnership with ESIP, we were able to locate the top 5 COVID-related sites that would bring together state declarations and waivers, federal CDC, Johns Hopkins COVID information, transportation information. It was really the best of the best, and we updated it every night. We still are. Well, that gave birth to our Esri project, which we had budgeted about a 6-month installation of Esri. I think we ended up doing it in about 2 weeks. It wasn't perfect, but it provided that hub for utilities, comms and fuel to go and look at the latest, greatest information there. So that was the first issue. The second issue at about 4 o'clock on the screen here is right in the middle of state policies and restrictions. Every time states would put out policies to protect people from the spread of COVID, it had cascading impacts that were unintended. Number one was it had a massive impact on truck movement. Truckers were frozen. They didn't know what to do. 14-day quarantine. If I go there, I'm going to be grounded for 14 days. There's all kinds of fear around that. And so literally within 10 days after we had the Esri portal stood up, working with Idaho National Labs and CISA, very quickly, Idaho National Labs put together an app called the Commercial Routing Assistance Tool. It wasn't really a routing tool, but it was a routing assistance tool which told drivers, based on the 11 state actions they were taking to prevent COVID, here's a map that can show you how to go through the least restrictive states at that moment, because that would change hourly sometimes. They had 5,000 users in no time. And that is still active today at cra.inl.gov. Tremendous tool that we are going to continue to leverage in that regard. The next piece that came up is about 3 o'clock from the COVID's, is the impacts to commerce. How were these state actions actually impacting commercial activity at the state level? Well, the private sector normally doesn't have an opportunity to give operational feedback to state directors or governors very quickly. There's trade associations that have lobbyists that go there, but there was no, the trucker didn't have an opportunity to give direct feedback. So very quickly, we worked with another group of partners of states and private sector companies and put together an operational feedback survey. It was anonymous. It allowed you to put in information about here, this policy, rate it 1 to 5. 5 was very disruptive. 1 was not disruptive. And we ranked them very quickly. It pulled together a map. Again, it was using data to inform decision makers. And we found out that this was not information the states get readily. We just did a very quick test in Pennsylvania. And we found out the most disruptive action of state government was closing the bars and restaurants based on the feedback we got. I thought that was interesting. We don't have the details yet, but so that was another opportunity to use data to inform decision makers from ground truth humans that would put information in. And the last one is going to be an ongoing issue. It's the PPE problem, right? Where do we get PPE? It was a nightmare. Everybody had their own siloed supply chains. So what we did working with the private sector and a number of trade associations is we basically assembled very quickly a national directory of all the suppliers, manufacturers, distributors of PPE in the nation. Probably 80% of them. You never get all of them, but they were all vetted. They were all financially, valid. We got data that, quite frankly, government doesn't want to know we got. We got more data than we needed, but we found out they're not Chinese people trying to, no offense, they're not trying to, supplant and circumvent the system. These are U.S. companies in the business of PPE very quickly, we used that data to build an Esri map of a directory. Then we were able to negotiate an agreement finally to be able to download that directory. Some utilities wanted that data within their Esri systems, within their WebEOC, utility systems, state systems. So we were able to do that so they can download the data. There's a subscription fee for that. And now we're working on the last one, which is kind of a PPE exchange. Uber has the model that we want, where somebody can enter in, I need 1 million boxes of this, and immediately all the people that have that can come there and I need a ride, and there's 5 drivers compete for the ride. So we just finished yesterday testing that. We got a real order from a real organization, a big healthcare organization. We put the order out to 6,700 suppliers, received an email, and within probably 10 minutes, they had 6 or 8 offers ready to complete that. The client came back to it and said, wow, that was fast. They said, I don't get that kind of response from our local PPE suppliers, let alone what we got here. So again, this is just using data. This is using data to get information out, get it in, and make decisions quickly. So this PPE Uber model will probably be ready to go next week, but we're working on other things as well. The whole point was how all this resides on people working together, trusting one another, and then using data to build and address the needs of use cases. So let's go to the next slide. So part of the big use case we're working on right now is damage assessment. Next slide. So damage assessment requires data from industry, states, feds, and others on the left side. We need imagery. We need sensor data. We need social media data. We need other sources of data for that. Some are public source, some are private source, some data is sensitive. And then we're working on a number of different solutions that can be produced from that, either data sets, dashboards, tools, apps, training process, what have you. Central to that data exchange is this GeoCollaborate tool, which we didn't know about. We learned about it from our states that we use now to conduct sensitive data sharing amongst users of that tool. So we can actually turn data on and it shows up for people to look at and use. We can turn it off and it goes away. So the private sector loves that because it allows them to share data they don't want hanging around out there, but they're willing to share that with a vetted group of people for an hour or a week or a day or whatever, and then turn it off. It's not saved at all, which is great. Next slide. So the use case for damage assessment is key, and we want to use that as a way to look at federal data sets, which the private sector doesn't really know all the data sets that are in the federal space, whether it's NASA or NOAA or USGS. So what we've done with DHS CISA is we ended up having them purchase a license, and it's connected to our license in the site. So you can see the two blue squares are connected. They share information. And so we use our license, if you will, to pull in data from private sector and states. It allows us then to share that data with DHS CISA, so we're all working off the same page. That's the trick. We'll never synchronize these silos in disasters if we don't get everyone looking at the same information at the same page. Not that we replace all information with one data set, but we have to come to what's the most reliable one, and let's all agree to use that while we use all our other data sets. Let's pick one, rank it with our ORL standard, and use it together. And so one of the things that this allows us to do is to look at the numerous data sets that might reside within NASA for imagery, or NOAA, or FEMA, or CDC. We can get data into the hands of private sector and states to look at and say, nah, that's okay, that one's really good, okay? Or this data set would be better if it was just sooner or more, had this coat of paint on it. So it allows us to look at data, to create data packages, merge data with other data, or to refine data sets, which is huge. The challenge is the private sector doesn't know what data is there. Right. So it's getting to that point of knowing what's there. Can we set up an exchange of looking at how we look at things? We've used our Friday calls every morning at 9, every Friday morning at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. We get our 2 working groups that meet. We use that as the way to look at create new use cases, match data up with that. It's really a tremendous forum. And this is an opportunity, I think, for ESIP to work with groups. that have data sets they want the private sector or states to look at and operationalize it. So it gives us a feedback loop. It gives a way to test it in real environments. Really fantastic. Let's go to the next slide. So I think this is the last one here. Yeah, our partnership with ESIP it's just been tremendous. And Aaron and I spoke, I think about 18 months ago, about maybe someday we can get to a point where ESIP and the SICE, the AHC, work together with data researchers on the left, private and public state operations folks on the right. We create joint use cases and we create usable solutions. All of us want solutions that can be used to save lives, to respond and recover from disasters, to prevent spread of COVID. If you don't come out with a solution, we end up getting stuck in debating the ways forward, or who's got the. We're arguing and discussing things that don't really create a solution. We're admiring the problem, and so what we try to do in the consortium is work at what is solvable and what now can we pull together in a data standpoint to merge that stuff together to create a usable solution. So I'll give you a case in point. We're using kind of a crowdsourcing approach to this now, where we're trying to get the best data for road closure data. So that could be a compilation of information, transportation, weather, satellite, ground truth, UPS delivery trucks or utility trucks. It's kind of a mashup of information that gives you the best overall data solution, right? So we're not there yet, but that's kind of what we're working on there. So let's go to our last slide. So we believe our partnership with ESIP could really forge some of this really fantastic opportunity. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Tom, that's great. I really appreciate that presentation, and also from Greg and David. And while we're keeping on that theme, and I'll check the chat to see what kind of questions that we have. Let me stop the screen share here and look at the chat. We do have a couple of questions, but I wanted to build on Tom, just what you were saying, because as we talk within the disaster lifecycle cluster at ESIP, we're always looking for what should we do next? What should we go down the road to do? And I wanted to check to see, how can we in the disaster lifecycle cluster accelerate that application of federal data sets into decision-making environments? I mean, how do you see a little bit more about how the disaster lifecycle cluster and ESIP can work to help you accomplish that?
So the best can you hear me okay? I'm sorry.
Yep, can you hear me?
The best answer that I can say is we have to, I think where there's great opportunity is to focus on a specific problem, or what we call a use case. If I can share my screen for a second, Dave, am I allowed to do that? Let's see.
Go ahead, Tom. You can try to if you, yeah, there you go.
Looks good.
We can see it.
Can you see that? Okay. So the private sector has worked with the states on just a few hundred use cases. These are problems that have come up over the years. And I just think we pick one or two and we focus ESIP members on what data do we have that could jump in and help with that use case. And the reason I say that is interesting. This is what DHS CISA was very interested in doing. Greg, I'll let you comment, because this is very hard for government federal to do on its own without industry and states. There's a lot of work government can do at the federal level, but they can't solve industry problems without operational people from industry being involved, right? So I share this as an example, and this isn't to be on this call, but I just wanted to show there are plenty of use cases documented that all we'd have to do, I think, is collectively pick one or two and then turn that over to ESIP and its partners and say, hey, what do you have? And the reason I say that is everything else we've done has failed. We've tried writing, we've tried workshops, we've tried webinars, and it's like those never go long enough to make enough traction. But the moment we focused on solving a problem, we had everybody and their cousins come to the table. It was it was the craziest thing. I just think people want to do stuff that's meaningful. And once they do a few, then they can come up with their own. You know, I'm sure the federal government has their own use cases that they need help from industry with, right? Or from states with. So maybe Greg wants to comment there, but we've tried everything in my 16 years. And the most powerful thing I can tell you when humans were involved was to get focused on solving a problem. And then everybody came to the table. It was the funniest thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Tom, let me just jump in.
Go ahead,
here.
Greg. Yep.
One example during the COVID was, our director, Chris Krebs, was very, very highly interested in any impact to commerce. And what presented itself was a lot of the data. When I say that, it was data that was, at a lot of the state websites that we were trying to collect. And we had RFIs going out to all of our regions to do this. And we got some response back, but where it was presented itself as an opportunity was through the National Governors Association, which actually was very successful in compiling all that data and presented itself. And it kind of morphed as it went along. But we saw that opportunity of, when AD Wilkinson over CISA Central came to us and said, hey, I wanted to do this. I want to get from point A to point B without any hiccups or issues. And even back when I did my trip to go see my mom in New York during a COVID type event with all these restrictions, it was really like, oh my gosh, you know what? I don't know if the Delaware restaurant is even open. Where can I get gas? If I get through Delaware, are there any restrictions? Do I have to quarantine for 14 days? All those questions just were, I don't know. But imagine put yourself into a truck driving or commerce type situation where you're moving goods and services from point A to point B. And we put together, and Tom, if you want to go ahead and demo it, I would love to see it and just let everybody kind of see that. Or if they want to just go to CRA.inl.gov. It's just amazing what we can do with this. And it's just a great use case example of solving a problem. So with that, Tom, take a stab at it and let's take a look at it.
Tom, you might be muted.
Yeah. You're on mute, Tom, if you want to unmute.
Here we go. Can you see my screen?
Yep. Now we can hear you too.
Okay. My life doesn't have enough mute buttons in it. That's my problem. So this was a combination of research, a little bit of technology, and a massively powerful impact of policy. So what this did was you plot your route from California up to Michigan. And what it did then was merge the data, in this case, state policies. Here are all the policies. This could be earthquake, lightning. It doesn't matter with the data set. These are the data sets. And then this swim lane diagram gave you green is non-restrictive, red is restrictive, orange was kind of restrictive. It gave you the best route to take. And it gave you three choices over here in the upper left corner, kind of a northern, central or southern route. So I'm just giving you a quick, detailed summary of this. Then it pulled the data sets for the folks that wanted the data. Then it gave you the summary for the executives. My point was, this took 3 days to think up on a call. It took 2 weeks to get it, or 10 days to get it done, and 2 weeks to approve legally. Now you have a tool being used that is just the beginning. It isn't the tool, it's the data. The data here is what makes this tool interesting. So we want to be able to use this. If Florida has a hurricane and crews from Wisconsin are traveling down, we want to be able to route them very quickly. But here's the other thing. This needs more data. We need flooding data to be added to this, okay? We need wildfire data, any data that would help with road closure, COVID data, aerial photographs, right? The tool is just the beginning to deliver the data. And it won't be the only tool. There'll be many tools. But the point was decision makers loved it because it showed data in a very graphical way so they could make decisions very quickly. So I use this as an example. This was not hard to do. The hard part was getting the people to trust, work together, and think up the ideas. But the data is out there, and we're just skimming the surface. And I just think
Tom.
there's many more things that we could do as together, all of us, to do this. Go ahead, Dave.
Tom, I just have a question that popped up in the chat, which is relevant to what you were just showing, that said, could a use case for a disaster during COVID be identified, like data to keep responders and evacuees safe, like hotel data, flooding imagery, et cetera?
Yes, that's a great idea.
Yeah, there's a number of questions coming in. Let me just throw this out too. Steve Young asked earlier, is there a role for commercial imagery data like Planet Lab? So if there was commercial source out there for data that we could use, do you see this as a way to get into the process?
Absolutely. The wonderful thing about working with the private sector is they want to look at all sources, both public or subscriber, fee-based, or even sensitive. We're working one use case right now that has sensitive data, which will never be shared outside of the SICE. But it's a damage assessment data piece for cell towers and so forth, and then one from the electric side on their damage assessment. So the answer is yes. They look at any and all, because there isn't going to be one data set that's going to be the magic bullet.
Yeah,
it's going to be a compilation of data that make the magic bullet. So it's a puzzle. It's not a piece.
And Tom, Ethan McMahon from EPA is asking, I like how you're using use cases. How do you select the most important ones to flesh out? What are the key similarities between those use cases?
Okay, I'm going to send you a link to a video we did for DHS to answer that exact question. What makes a good use case?
And you can put that in the chat.
By, I'll put it in the chat. Exactly. Stand by. That
sounds great. Appreciate that. Couple of comments. This is a super cool tool. The CRA tool. We have a lot of folks in ESIP. I think they're going to be checking that out. And I was wondering, Dave, this is a question for David Green. David, when you see a tool like this coming together, like the CRA tool that DHS and INL and All Hazards has put together, are there data sets perhaps that NASA might have that might be able to contribute to routing instructions?
Sure. I mean, the idea of the use case, the idea of trying to answer a set of key questions that people are asking is what we're after. And the idea of getting whatever data is needed. So there's definitely imaging data, distress situation information, the social, economic, and population to know where people are, the mobility of people is another set of data that aligns with your, getting from point A to point B question. So NASA has a lot of that, and so do a lot of others. And as you noted, people don't even know what data does exist. And then the question is understanding where where are those use cases coming from. So I look forward to seeing what Tom has in terms of what is an effective use case. I think what we found for COVID is it presented a couple of unique use cases that we hadn't encountered before that has kind of that personal interaction component into it. And one of the things we were looking at just recently as a use case was the fire season that we're expecting. And people from the fire were like, well, how do we fight a fire when we have to stand side by side with each other? How do we know which locations to actually get to? How do we know which locations are have a fire, but now we have to give people instructions about where to shelter at the same time there's COVID? And so what it's done is it's created some unique questions that we haven't had before. So what I'd like to suggest here is if we come up with a case study, and we've talked about this, is that COVID actually does allow us to ask some questions which we hadn't thought of before. So of those hundreds that, Tom, you have, there might be a couple that are a good example of this kind of new situation of bringing, health data, human population location data, as well as the infrastructure and environment together. And to the question on the high resolution and the commercial data, NASA and some of the other agencies are now quite involved in using and making available commercial data alongside the open data of the federal agencies.
Yeah, that sounds that sounds really good, and I think that there's a great opportunity there. I'm just checking the chat to see if there's any other questions. And while we're looking that over, I just wanted to show in the chat, or let everybody know in the chat, Tom put a couple of links. One is what is a good use case, which is a YouTube video. Another one is the commercial routing assistant tool, which you can click on and watch that video. And then one above, I think he said one of the other ones he posted was what is a good use case. Yeah. So you can check the chat for that. And I wanted to direct everybody's attention for a moment in your, and I don't think the speakers will be able to go over to this, but within Kiko chat, and you can see the link up at the top that says Slido. I have posted a poll question that I'd like everybody to click on and answer, because Tom mentioned it, Greg mentioned it, called ORL levels, operational readiness levels. This is something that was put together through ESIP and the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster and the All Hazards Consortium, and also some utilities, where we came up with a ranking level for the usability of data operationally. So it was really driven by the utility sector saying, hey, look, we know there's a lot of data out there. We want to be able to trust it, but we need some sort of ranking tool. So this is just a question of more curious than not. It looks like we're running about 88% yes and 13% no with 8 responses. There's 9 responses. So if you click on that, we can see that live. I can actually share my screen so you can see what the results look like as they're coming in. The operational readiness levels are going to continue to mature. We're looking at various use cases and seeing that some data sets that are useful in one use case may not be as useful for another one. And we also want to expand that into the research environment. So suppose there's some data being gathered in a research experiment, and that data could be used operationally because they were in the right place at the right time. Let's say a mission to look at Saharan dust layers is going on from NASA and during the hurricane season. Well, that data might be very useful for the air quality folks along the Gulf Coast, and perhaps that data could be shared. So we're looking at perhaps assigning ORL levels to some of this research data as we get more and more participation through the ESIP Federation to look at these different use cases and things like that. So while that poll's open, I just wanted to check the chat to see if there were any other questions. Karen,
Dave,
did you have any questions for any of the speakers?
Dave, one just quick note before we jump over to Karen. This is Erin. Ellie put the Slido link in the chat. So if for our speakers who aren't in Kiko chat, if you want to go and take the poll, she's just put it in the chat again. So you can go directly to Slido too.
Oh, Ellie, you're awesome. Thank you. This is why when you have such an awesome meeting like this, it's great to have other observers that know way more than you do. That's way more than I do. For sure. So, Karen, I was just going to throw it over to you for just a moment.
Yeah, so I often see ESIP and the role of our disasters lifecycle cluster as being kind of a bridge between the use case and the data that is available, the tools that are available in the ESIP community. And I just wonder what ways we might be able to make that work more effectively, especially for, some of the needs that might be coming up due to the pandemic.
So I have one, Karen, that I was just on a call. I was just on a call this past week with the electric sector. Okay. And one of the issues is, first of all, I love your idea of having the life cycle cluster be the mediator. I think it's great. But here's a use case I'd like the group to think about. Utilities are getting ready to move crews across state lines towards Florida, the southeast for hurricane season. That changes into the northeast or the wildfires in the west. So as they're moving these crews, not just utilities, but anyone driving trucks, right? They're concerned about where is COVID, what are the metrics around the area I'm going to be driving into and driving through? Okay, what is my risk? What are the state policies in place I need to be aware of, which we kind of started? Their concern is what's the risk environment from a human population, number one, and human population that has COVID, right? That would be a tremendous piece to work on because no one's really tracking that in one place, right? And I think the other one that keeps coming back is damage assessment. The utilities need damage assessment data very quickly, probably within hours if they can get it. Wave 2 responders need it probably within a day. So the damage assessment could be social media information, it could be satellite, it could be low-level drone or medium-level drones. This is another thing they're looking for currently. But I'm just giving the ones off the top of my head. But Karen, I would bet ESIP members brainstorming, if they understand just if they understand the process they're creating a use case, could come up with 4 or 5. But I love the idea of mixing population, COVID with critical infrastructure. Those kind of use cases are going to have everyone's attention pretty much at every federal agency because it's hard to do. And I think ESIP is in a good position to work with us to do it.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I think that I can imagine an opportunity where periodically, maybe once a quarter or so, we might have kind of a short joint session where you go into just a little more detail about a use case, one that you're currently focused on, like the 2 that you've mentioned here, and allow our members to ask questions and perhaps think in advance of what might be a solution, and a little give and take, and see if we can find some matches that way.
Yeah, just let me know the date. I'll be glad to do it.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. And Karen, I just want everybody to know too that I changed the poll question. We talked a lot about sharing of information and the difficulties that exist, and so the Slido poll. I'll share my screen again here with what are your top 3? If you have just one, that's fine. But what are your top 3 priorities with regard to sharing information internally and externally? In other words, is it security? Is it being able to trust it? Is it that we have 5 versions of the same product? Is it, things like that? What are the top priorities? And all of these answers are going to go into the disaster lifecycle cluster so we can formulate the best ways to move forward to really help, like Tom said, help those agencies get that feedback, help the All Hazards Consortium work more effectively with their private sector partners, and help DHS and CISA really mature the ORL models so they can apply those in their operations as well. So I see that that information coming in, which is great. I see metadata, ease of use, reliable information, and easily understandable ability for privacy and data security. Yeah.
So this is David. So one of the issues we're encountering, and many of our partners and users are encountering, more with COVID than we'd seen perhaps before, is that there is direct data that we've traditionally been able to get, and under ideal research conditions you can get, but we are searching for proxy data. And this issue of trust and proxies is a serious condition. So for example, if you cannot get into an area to fly a plane or get into an area to survey individual houses, or to be able to get in there to find out why the power is off or why the power is on, we need proxy data. And so it's showing up a lot now with COVID because there's communities we can't get access to. We used to talk about these things for remote communities in Alaska or something, but now we're talking all over. There's a lot of places that we're looking for alternate trusted proxy data and how to formulate that into something that can be actually used in an operational environment. One example I've had is those who are trying to run the economic models right now for recovery. And they can't get a lot of traditional commercial market data, transportation logistics, inventory data, activity data. And they're looking for something to feed the economic model that will inform how to open things up and how to recover. And so this issue of what are trusted proxies, and I can tell you the research community has a hard time with this because they want the absolute exact thing for the exact thing you want. Well, that's a luxury you don't always have. And so this is a serious issue. So we need to figure out what is acceptable.
This is great input, David, and we're writing this down and documenting it as well. Karen is typing feverishly. I wanted to.
Well, I'll give you a quick example. We often said, you talked about the power before. There was an assumption made that if the lights are on and the street lights are on, and that there must be people there. But that's not necessarily the case when people have actually moved and been dislocated. Just because the lights are back on doesn't mean that the factory is actually up and running right now. And so you can be misled. You got the wrong measure for the wrong thing. So these are really important issues right now to figure out what is reliable.
Yeah, that's true. That's great. That's a great piece of information. I think I heard Tom Moran laughing a little bit back in the background with some of the analysis of power on, power off, and things that we're trying to use to gauge economic activity recovering. Tom, you want to say anything about that?
David, you're right on the money. And, we are in the process of trying to negotiate an agreement with a very large credit card transaction company, where every time somebody does a transaction, it's recorded, right? And they won't give it to you in real time, but you can get close to it. Very sensitive data because of insider trading, and people take that data and then buy stock for Walmart when they see things going on in a certain area, right? So there's very sensitive information. But we will have that. We will get that information eventually. And you zeroed in on something that's really important, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, at least for a couple of years. And that is monitoring the economic impact of not just COVID, but its cousins, right? Its other cascading impacts. COVID was the cause, but who would have thought it would have closed bars and restaurants, which would kill the supply chain, cause PPE, levels to skyrocket. It's all these cascading things that we have to monitor as well. So,
we're seeing the impacts on the food. I mean, there's been a lot of discussions about disruptions to the food supply because of processing plants or the workers can't go there. And all of a sudden you've got stuff backing up in the farmer's field that can't be processed or gets stuck in a factory or it's sitting in trucks that can't deliver. And so we need a way to capture that kind of representative data on the activity characteristics.
And most of that resides in the private sector. And let me share with you something. Let me share with you. So one of the private sectors said to me, he said, "Tom, there's part of disasters we hate." And I said, "What's that?" He said, it's the research and reporting part that comes after the storm. I said, "What are you talking about?" This is a big utility. He said, "I'm not kidding you. We get requests, probably over 50 requests from universities around the country calling us, asking us for data. He said, we don't have the time to do that. Isn't there a group? Isn't there a place? We could do this in one place. So we're not taking 50 interviews with 50 grad students. I didn't realize it was that big an issue. It's a big issue. So maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe this is an opportunity for ESIP to become maybe a way to condense some of that. They have the information. Many are willing to share it, but I didn't realize the load of requests that come to these folks in the private sector for that kind of data after some big event.
This is Ellie Davis, one of the community fellows, and I can absolutely attest to that as a graduate student, that there is a lot of survey fatigue. My research is studying the impact of disasters on small businesses, and people are just, they don't want to answer a bunch of different surveys from a bunch of different places on very, very similar topics, especially right now with hurricanes and COVID. And in the Carolinas, they've just been over-surveyed. And one of the things I am really interested in is finding a way to have a place, maybe that's ESIP, that you can submit your survey data safely, securely, so that it still follows under IRB protocols, but then you have this longitudinal data set that people can go back to with like business data. And the census does some of that, but there's a lot of questions that they don't answer because they just don't have time. So that was something I would be interested in.
That's great. That's great input, Ellie. And I want to let everybody know we have about 5 minutes left to go in this particular session. I changed the poll question within Slido. So if you could go over to the Slido link and answer this poll, that'll give us some more information on where we should be headed in the future under the disaster lifecycle cluster, so we can get more active in certain areas that we're really addressing community-driven issues and community-driven problems, because that's what ESIP is all about. And I see the bars going up and down, and where we should focus. I'm going to close this particular question in about 15 seconds. So if you could go ahead and click on what you want, I'm going to bring up another question, which is a more simple yes or no question. In about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to change the poll question here. We had 19 responses to that one. So I'm going to go into this one. Maybe you did both of them, I guess. That's how this Slido works. That's great. So we have 18 responses. Do you have an interest in working with a disaster lifecycle cluster? That will give Karen and myself an idea for how proactive we can be to engage others that have been on this call and in this session, because we can email individuals or the whole group that have signed up for this particular cluster. So that's great. And the last one I want to put in here is, or second to last one, how can private sector operational decision makers learn about and evaluate federal data set usefulness to their environments? So maybe this is more towards the federal or state folks that are on this session. Is there a way that you know of how private sector operational decision makers can access and take a look at your data? Is there anything simple that comes to mind? If it's too complex, that's okay. We have ways to connect into federal agencies already, but I wanted to put this question up to see if anybody wanted to answer that one. And then I have in the 3 minutes left, I have a final poll question, and that is, how has your ESIP experience been so far in this online world that we now live in? Is it fantastic, awesome, or you're not sure yet? So with that, as you're answering that question, I would love to thank our partners, our presenters, David Green from NASA's Applied Sciences Division, Greg McShane. Greg, thanks for taking your time and joining us in this session from DHS CISA, and also Tom Moran. You know, you guys are welcome to come back, and please participate in our session that starts at 3:30 Eastern Time. We're going to take a 30-minute break in just a moment. We'll come back at 3:30. And what we're going to focus on at 3:30 is the same topic of ESIP public-private partnerships in the age of COVID, but we're going to turn our attention to data-driven decision-making and community engagement. So we're going to hear from Nadine Alamé, the CEO of the Open Geospatial Consortium. They put together a lot of standards that have enabled us to access and share a lot of geospatial data. We're going to hear from Maggie Glasgow from NASA JPL out in Pasadena, California. She's a part of the disasters program, and she's going to talk about linking floods, landslides, critical infrastructure, and modeling exposure, how we can access perhaps some of that data, maybe put it into the All Hazardous Consortium sensitive information sharing environment and evaluate some of those products. Then we're going to hear from Dan Pallone, the Chief Technology Officer of Element 84. Dan's going to talk about natural disasters on top of COVID, preparing for disaster collection and use. And then I'm going to round it up with a presentation on data access and synchronization across platforms to show a little bit about a rapid activity that we did with the National Weather Service up in Alaska to bring in not only geospatial data, but pictures, video, and reports from the public. So we hope you join us. I'll leave it open, Karen, if there's any final comments you have before we end this session.
Just did an excellent job. Our next session is 4 to 5:30.
I'm sorry, 4 to 5:30. We're taking a break now between 3:30 and 4. So the clock on my wall is not correct. So
well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Dave, and colleagues.
Partnership focused on the impacts of COVID and its relationship now to disaster response systems. Please be thinking about ideas that come out of today's sessions that need further attention from us, and any ideas that you have for how to focus our activities over the next few months. And there will be an opportunity at the end to capture those. I'll be mainly taking notes and trying to use the information from today really to guide our future activities. So let me introduce Nadine Alamé, who will be speaking to us from her position as the CEO of OGC, and the role that the standards work that the OGC brings for geospatial can support our activities as well. So Nadine?
Thank you, Karen. Let me share my slides here. Share the screen. You can see my screen, thumbs
beautiful.
up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Cool. So thank you so much, Karen, for the introduction. Thank you, Dave, for the energy. I just got out of the first session. So thank you, Dave and Karen, for actually organizing these sessions within the ESIP community. It's like an intersection. It's the community, it's the public-private partnerships, it's the disasters, it's COVID. And what is COVID? Is it an overlay on top of everything? Is it the new normal? You name it. So I'm happy to be here to contribute to the dialogue. So I'll be short. I have just a few slides as conversation starters, most of all. But I think in terms of a topic, or in terms of what to leave people with, I think what we're doing here in this conversation and the previous one is we're really evolving what it means to have a spatial data infrastructure from the notions that we've had before, like the NSDI, to everything we talked about earlier, which is, the public-private, and how do you incorporate the drone data, and how do you incorporate the mobility data, and how do you accommodate for these scenarios that are not your typical spatial data infrastructure scenarios. And I think collectively as a community, this is where we should be going. How do we evolve the concept of a spatial data infrastructure? So I'm not going to go into what OGC is, the Open Geospatial Consortium, other than to say I've been the CEO for about a year and a quarter, and it's been, a great ride so far. But in that year, for those of us, on the line who are familiar with OGC, we're trying to evolve the OGC as well. We are definitely known as a consensus-based open standards organization for anything dealing with geospatial and location. But when you look at even our relationship with ESIP and the Earth science community, we're actually way more than that. And I want to touch a little bit on that later on, because some of the activities that we have been doing within our innovation program are probably, I was thinking in the previous session, are probably one mechanism where we can take the conversation and the ideas and the use cases to practice and actual public-private partnerships towards operations. So that's, again, if you want to keep something in mind, is I'm looking in my role as the CEO of OGC, but honestly as a human being trying to contribute to getting us out of the crisis, but most importantly, not to have to deal with something similar in the future, me and my kids, right? So let's do things right. So I'm trying to latch on to concrete things that we can do together. So that's the gist of it. So I will skip, it's in the presentation that will be made available here. So in terms, again, of conversation starters, I don't know if eventually they'll create a puzzle, that's the story, but it's been very interesting to see this dialogue on COVID in the last few months, and the aha moments that people, organizations, governments are having about the value of geospatial and the value of information sharing. And to be honest with you, that dialogue sometimes pains me a little bit, because here, yes, in this group, in ESIP, in OGC, in GEO, we're already there. That's what we do. We've been saying this for years. It's good if I take, what Dave Green said earlier from NASA. It's like, there are some good things here. So it's good that the rest of the world literally is realizing the value of geospatial. So I took snippets from, say, the NISGIC. We actually had to put out a joint statement that says, our leaders, in terms of politicians and government and decision makers, they're starting to recognize the value of where. I love that there's this message that we heard even in the previous session, that the information is there. It's like, how do we get it? But how do I, combine it? And you have these messages, again, these are formal statements by communities like us from the NAPSIC, right? The public safety guys, about the information sharing and how critical it is in these days. From the Research Data Alliance, they published a report, I think last week, on data sharing. Same thing, there's a need for timely and accurate collection. This is not like a general statement. These are statements within and as a reaction to COVID. So that's sort of like the painful part, because you and me, we know this. Now there are all these, let's call them references, and organizations and communities, sometimes outside of our circles, that are also coming to the same conclusion. The last one here, epidemics and pandemics, such as COVID-19, this is from the National Academy of Science and Engineering, have clear geographic dimensions. And if you listen to our CTO, George Percival, he says COVID is a geospatial problem. So with that in mind, I love that there's this dialogue, and keep in mind that I want to go from dialogue to concrete actions. So there's another dialogue going sort of in parallel or cross-cutting. I hope you can see my hands. That's why I miss people interactions. The dialogue on the ethics part, and I heard a little bit before in the previous session, and this session talks about trusted data. So there's this ethical part and how we're going to use the data, especially when it comes to contact tracing, another geospatial, location proximity problem. And here I'm listing just a couple of examples of the community, again, trying to come together and figure out what are we doing here. Even it's coming on the right-hand side from an OGC trend perspective, it's popping up as a topic that even the technical people have to be talking about, because the way we provide access to fair information, findable, accessible, interoperable, usable, has to take into account how this information is also used for good and for bad, as I tell my kids all the time. There's also no shortage, we've seen it in the prior session, of information, or of data, or whatever you want to call it, or knowledge. It's a combination of all of these. I see it, it materializes as portals and dashboards and feeds, and I mean, you name it. Part of it is some of us are reinventing the wheel, but we have to do what we have to do, right? This is not a time for luxury. This is a time for immediate decisions, but it starts to bring up some questions here. How do I integrate data from here to there? How do I learn from what Europe is doing? How do I learn from what Taiwan is doing in terms of not the strategies, right, and the policies, but even on the information sharing and the contact tracing, maybe policies? And how do I contribute to this? Let's call it mess. Is it fair? There's just like so much. How many dashboards, I don't know, how many dashboards do you check before you go to sleep every night? At least I do that. What's happening in my county? What's happening in my state? What's happening in the US? What's happening in the world? What's happening where my staff lives? And it's like here, there, and everywhere. And what do you trust? Again. So I think as a community, I also want to throw into this, ESIP and OGC, we've had, a long-term relationship on trying to advance the concept of a spatial data infrastructure, sort of like a place where we can connect these things or have these things connect to each other for disasters, right? We've had disaster pilots within OGC, so NOAA, NASA, USGS, ESA, the Canadian NRCan, they all sort of contribute to advancing this concept for disasters. And you can, there's a lot of information here, but it's about how do I integrate new sources like UAS, crowdsourced data? How do I get to the stakeholders, to the actual first responders, the wildfires? How do I support the phases of disaster management, and on and on? So I want to say here, there's not a shortage of information. There's not a shortage of portals and dashboards. And there's honestly not a shortage of activities that have been going on in the last few years to advance us, right? To have us deal with disasters way better. And, this is one of the focus of GEO, for instance, and we all work very closely with GEO. There's no shortage of activities. And here, again, these are snippets of projects, here and there, of, flooding scenarios and wildfire scenarios and landslides. And recently, we've also shifted to the smart cities, right? Because those cities are becoming connected with the sensors and the IoT, and we want to use them. And guess what? The use cases usually are also around flooding and so on within that context. So from an OGC perspective, we're working on, like Karen said, great, to the point. We're working on the standards to connect these things, on the interoperability framework to connect these things so that we don't have to keep doing this over and over again and actually get to the solution of the problems. So here's what I'm proposing here, or I'm not even proposing. I feel like it's bubbling up within the OGC community that I'd like to share with ESIP and hopefully work with you on it. I'm checking the watch, so to make sure I'm within time. So what's bubbling up is, let's evolve this concept of a spatial data infrastructure, in this case, to add the health component to it. We heard earlier, the PPEs, the hospitals, sadly, the capacity of funeral homes, none of this is in our usual definition of a spatial data infrastructure. And guess what? This is the information that we're needing these days. Literally, we actually have an OGC member who tracks the funeral homes capacities in different places. And we need that information for, again, a weird type of painful decision making. So how about we put together, again, going from those use cases, we bubble them down to something, to anything, honestly, right? Because they're all important. That's why it was so hard to answer the Slido question, Dave. So something that's based on standards, we agree on that. It's where location is a unifying concept. So it's not an afterthought. It's like, ooh, what's the value of location? It's like, let's get over this. Data-driven, granular sharing with the ethics and the privacy and all of this taken into consideration. An ecosystem. Let's start an ecosystem that's not just beneficial for the government or the public sector, but also for the medical and health community, because the medical and health community also needs the information that we have in a regular, let's say, traditional spatial data infrastructure, and impacted industries. Let's start to form together through this dialogue that Dave Green has started, and so many others, Tom Moran, I was taking notes like crazy. A pandemic early warning, response, recovery. We can do this if we do it together. So this is my last slide. If we want to build it, honestly, the technical part is probably the easiest, but it's not a fait accompli, right? We have new data, we have the artificial intelligence, we have the data analytics. So it's never the same. It's a moving target. But let's build on the latest. Let's incorporate not just the traditional layers of an SDI. What about the mobility data? That's so critical to contact tracing. Yes, let's expand the concept. And I'm not saying dump all the mobility data in what we think about as a spatial data infrastructure, but like, how would that work such that to a user, to an application developer, to a decision maker, it's not here and there, it's actually one harmonized sort of a front. So we need that shift. I heard the impact on supply chain and so on. One of the use cases that came to us at OGC is this, from the Verizons of the world. We're all now teleworking, and we're all having, distance learning and online camps and so on. And I'm pointing to my kids right outside the door. And they need help. Again, we need to bridge in terms of data, because now all of a sudden they have to deploy, either new lines or new capabilities. And it would so help to have an infrastructure to come to that doesn't just include the road and the rivers and, and all of that, but also the areas that have the highest, density of, students or low-income students or old people, or hotspots. So this is where you start, see the combination of like the health data with the other data. Another use case that has come to us for what we call non-geospatial savvy people is doctors. So even when you go to the doctor and you have the symptoms, the doctor could, make a recommendation, right, and give you a routine or whatever to help you out. But it would be great and more efficient to actually know for the doctor to know, which county or which zip code you live in, so that they know, is this a hotspot? Is this not a hotspot? Because they could recommend different things. They recommend what you tell to your family and your friends, probably different. I'm not a doctor, obviously, but having, information about the spread as a sort of an authoritative data source, or maybe not authoritative, maybe that's a trusted data source within the other part of the health and medical, history and symptoms and so on. So that's trying to bridge all of these. And I go back, the best part that I got from the previous session is the use cases. So let's help each other. Let's map this path from the dialogue, from the use cases to an actual concrete activity, which in this case I'm saying, or I'm labeling as a health spatial data infrastructure with not the usual definition of a traditional definition of SDI. So hopefully that helps start the conversation, Dave and Karen.
Nadine, that was terrific. Thank you very much. You've really given us a lot to think about. And I really love that point of trying to get geospatial data and other data into the hands of decision makers that are not geospatially savvy. I mean, how much more and how much faster decisions could we get made when we put that information? It's trusted and or authoritative, and those decision makers can make that 30-second decision. That's one of the things that Tom Moran and the All Hazardous Consortium is really looking at as utility crews have to, decide what road to turn down. If they don't know that road is flooded, imagine 100 bucket trucks going down a road and it's flooded and they have to turn around. Well, they have to damage a whole bunch of property to turn trucks around in many locations. And so if they knew what was going on, and they're not GIS savvy, but they just want to know, where should I go?
Yeah.
So this is terrific. Well, thanks very much. We're going to I'll ask everyone, if you have questions, to put them into the chat. We'll ask those questions after these presentations are completed, and we'll go through the series of speakers that we have, and hopefully we'll have lots of time for discussion. And so our next speaker was supposed to be Don Sullivan from NASA Ames. Don let us know just before the session started that he had a family emergency, so he wasn't going to be able to join us. So our thoughts and prayers are with Don and his family, and we hope that we can catch up with Don, and certainly the session is recorded so we can engage him and get his feedback and contributions too. In the meantime, we're going to go to the next speaker, which is Maggie Glasgow from NASA JPL. And Maggie is working with a lot of projects that are funded through the NASA Applied Sciences Disasters Program that have relevance to our discussion. So Maggie, if you're there, I'd love you to take control of the screen and kick off your presentation.
Sure. Okay, just 1 second while I do that. Share and slideshow. Okay. Everybody see that okay?
Yep, it looks beautiful. Thanks, Maggie.
Okay, wonderful. So this doesn't necessarily have to do with the COVID problem, but this is an overview of some collaborative projects that are working together in David Green's A37 disasters portfolio. Dave asked me to talk about these 3 projects that are working together with the Pacific Disaster Center with some trusted data issues. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the disasters program, the A37 portfolio, and these 3 projects. And just kind of go over that, and hopefully I can do that in the time allotted. Let me just start my little timer here so I can keep track of myself. So David went over this a little bit, I think, in the first session, but I just wanted to go over that, what the disasters program is about for you all right now. So the disasters applications area promotes the use of Earth observations for prediction of, preparation for, and response to and recovery from natural and technological disasters. So what we do is responding to and helping with recovery of disasters and natural hazards. And we support emergency managers and disaster responders for these events. We target a number of disasters, including earthquakes, volcanoes, landslides, floods, fires, and other natural hazards. We have a number of coordinators across the NASA centers and NASA headquarters that help to facilitate the generation of products that add value to the decision-making process. We're not an operational agency. So we only activate during event upon either an end user request, or we do internally activate when we find that we have a research problem that we'd like to investigate. We share these results directly to our end users, either via the disasters website or through our geospatial portal, or directly to them through other means. What I'm going to talk about today are some projects that were funded through the recent A37 2018 Disaster Roses call. And these proposals were looking for user-centric applications for research enabling informed decisions and actions. And they were looking for inherently collaborative proposals. And I'm going to talk about 3 projects, including one that I'm the PI of, that are working together to do work that is looking at natural hazards and are trying to do collaborative research. What David is looking for in these projects are looking to embrace and invest in coordination activities to deliver results that strengthen disaster risk reduction and have multidisciplinary projects that harness collaborative partnerships. And one of the key points of this call was to have end users in mind prior to even proposing to the call. So we had to have a strong collaboration with an end user partner before we could even propose. And so many of us had strong ties in with our end users even before we proposed. And two of the projects, mine and Dolly Kirschbaum's, the Landslides project, are working with the Pacific Disaster Center. And this piqued Dave Jones' curiosity on how we were working with the Pacific Disaster Center, because we were creating trusted data products that were going to be delivered to DisasterAware, which is their global platform for delivering trusted data to their end users. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the PDC's DisasterAware in this talk. This was a means for us to leverage a partnership between our 2 projects. And then we also identified a means for a collaboration between the floods project and the infrastructure project for a pilot study in India, as well as a cross collaboration between the 3 projects, the floods, the landslides, and the infrastructure project, just for a collaboration to look at just how a event might unfold where you had a flood, a landslide, and how that cascading hazard might affect an area, and how that impacted exposure and infrastructure. And so all 3 projects are looking to work together on that. And I'll talk a little bit about that and how we plan to collaborate as part of a request from David for all of the projects to realign to work together. Now, we've also identified a means to work with the Pacific Disaster Center under all of these 3 projects to deliver our products through DisasterAware. So again, we've identified a way to work with a key end user partner to produce and deliver these products to a global platform that will deliver this information to end users that include NGOs, the DoD, municipal users in several countries, etc. So I'll just talk a little bit about the project focus of each of the projects. For the floods project, we're trying to use DisasterAware, which is an open access global flood system, to disseminate the flood information for potential impacts to aid with emergency response. We have 4 main components of the project, 3 tracks which are using flood forecasting models, and 2 tracks which are using Earth observations, one to do flood inundation extent and depth, and one to do damage assessment to look at vulnerable locations. And then we've got an end-to-end pipeline to integrate the 3 components to deliver these products and information to the Pacific Disaster Center. Now, all of these components are part of an integrated flood platform that helps with flood risk mitigation to help increase resiliency of impacted communities. And one of the key factors of this project is that it's a global flood alerting system that doesn't necessarily exist currently. And that was one of the reasons that PDC had approached us to work with them in the first place, is because one of the key factors is that this system does not exist currently. So I just wanted to quickly show you one of the outputs for the flood project. We worked on the Central and East Africa floods earlier this year. So if you look at the A and B, this is the flood alerting based on the watersheds in Africa. So green is just an advisory, yellow is a warning, and red is a watch. No, that's not right. No, yes, that's right. No, yellow should be a watch and red should be a warning. I think we had that switched. So that is based on the watersheds, and then we convert that into a risk alert, which you can see in the panel C here, where you see the dots in the areas, and then in panel D, you can overlay that with exposure information based on the flood alerts and see where areas of vulnerable populations might be exposed to flood damage. So for the landslide project, these are the key questions and context for decision making that are related to that project. So for landslides, what they're looking at is how can the Earth observation and other data be used to characterize landslide hazard. What they're looking for is what are the most effective ways to estimate rainfall and earthquake triggered landslides. And how can landslide impacts be meaningfully quantified using appropriate audiences? And they're looking for these different decision-making contexts to help them to drive the project. They want to develop a more robust decision-making framework, provide open source and flexible models to characterize the disaster life cycle, and close the knowledge gap within the decision support structures to address location and assets at risk. For the infrastructure project, key questions include exposure model development for critical infrastructure, integration of hazard and exposure models for risk assessment, and examination of factors that could lead to cascading effects from multiple hazards. So you can see how these 3 projects kind of interleave in certain respects and can form a pretty cool interrelationship and collaboration. So linking these 3 projects together, we've discussed a way of investigating how these cascading hazards can evolve during an event. And what we want to do is leverage each project's expertise to conduct a study on an appropriate event and see how these events evolve, and do an impact analysis which looks at how these events occur individually versus considering them in a multi-hazard context. And then when they're considered in a multi-hazard context, how do we change the analysis or methodology that needs to be used to examine the specific response? Is the multi-hazard impact analysis more helpful? And what is learned or gained from using the multi-hazard context? And what are the challenges and opportunities in working across the disciplines? So just a little bit, Dave had asked me to talk a little bit about PDC and disaster aware. So they use an integrated approach to collect information and improve decision support capabilities for disseminating information for decision support. So you can see the different areas where they conduct their decision making, and then that ties into their decision support capabilities. So they take observations and modeling and risk analysis, GIS visualization and computing, and tie that into their decision support capabilities for informed decision making. There are several gaps and challenges with that. What they're trying to do is improve that with their decision-making capabilities with disaster aware. Overcoming those challenges include tools for decision makers, which simplify, automate, integrate, identify risks and exposure, estimate impacts, widely disseminate, and update assessments. And we're all trying to tie into this information through the disaster aware platform. I just wanted to provide you with the link to the project information for the different projects that are funded under the A37 portfolio. These include the 3 projects that I talked about, the landslides, the floods, and the infrastructure exposure project. So that's the link, but I think this is being recorded so you can grab that. And this is the disasters website and the link to disaster aware. This is the email for myself, the PI of the floods project, Dahlia, the PI of the landslides project, and Charles, the PI of the exposure project. And that is my last slide. And I think that I am mostly in time. Yeah. So thank you.
That's great, Maggie. Thanks very much. This is terrific. And I'm just wondering, just a quick follow-up question for you with the PDC. Have they positioned themselves either through their app or through their infrastructure as a really as a trusted data supplier into other applications, or are they just supplying their data into their particular application?
Yes, I believe that we can consider them a trusted data supplier. They have a official use. So disaster aware is sort of for official use. You get an account and you basically are able to register and get into what they call the EMOPs. Mm-hmm. And so that's the sort of the quote unquote restricted use part of disaster aware. And then they also have just a regular app, web app / app that you can download onto your mobile device, which is Disaster Alert. And so that's sort of the public domain version of it. So you can use the public domain version for disaster alerts, but for the official version, which I think is the trusted data version, you would need to register and get the EMOPS version.
Sure. Oh, that sounds great. Well, we look forward to working with these projects as you have actual products that are being pushed out. And the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster would love to take a look at them. And then we could also easily engage y'all Hazardous Consortium and perhaps even DHS, CISA for taking a look at some of these products to just, provide feedback and do some evaluation as to whether or not it's really helping them in their decision-making environments.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, Maggie, thanks so much. I want to move so we can keep on time and have great discussions at the end. I want to move to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Dan Pallone, and Dan is with Element 84, and he's going to be talking about we have COVID that has really distracted all of us and gotten us really turned our lives upside down. What if we have other disasters on top of COVID, and how do we prepare for that data collection and that use? So Dan, thanks a lot for being here with us, and look forward to your presentation. And you might be, I don't hear you. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Give me
There you
one.
go.
Let me fix that again here. All right. I will share out my slides. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Hopefully everybody can see my slides.
Yep, we can see him
and
great.
hear me okay. All right, great. So I'm Dan Pallone. Thank you, Dave and Karen, for the opportunity to speak here. I appreciate the invitation. I am CEO and CTO of Element 84. I've given a few talks with ESIP before, so there may be a little bit of pieces you have seen here, but I kind of wanted to talk through this whole idea of preparing data collection and use. You may have seen some of my earlier talks around how to alienate an audience and how to not get invited to speak at ESIP. I think I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian view here to some of this, and part of it is to set the stage for the conversation coming next. We talk a lot about trust, and the whole first session was around this in terms of trusted data. We're obviously having that discussion now as well. And so I want to step back and kind of talk about what do we mean when we talk about trust? What does it actually mean to build trust? So like a simple Google, nothing fancy here, right? So tell the truth. Admit when you don't know something, admit when you're wrong. If you say you'll do it, do it. Explain your thought process and extend trust to others and include them. And I'm going to argue in this talk that this kind of trust chain that we're talking about goes beyond just the trusted data piece. And I don't think that's news to anybody. I don't think that's earth shattering, but I want to kind of poke at some of the other pieces in particular. So when we talk about trusted data, I would say, ironically, that is actually one of the most mature pieces of this chain and that we have. We've talked about operational readiness levels. There's other certifications around like Card4L from CIOS and things along these lines that we can use to kind of vouch for data. When we talk about operational readiness levels, so these are the operational readiness level 1. But trusted data provider, secure data transfer, optimized interoperability standards, SLAs around services, verified and tested metadata. Right? So this is, I'll argue this is reasonably well understood. It's not perfect. We're not done by any stretch, but a ton of great work has gone into this. But there's a gap now. There's a cliff that we run into that I'm going to suggest we're not talking enough about. The difference from going from something, so if I'll read off a little bit kind of the description around NASA GRACE data. So GRACE provides user-friendly level 3 data grids of monthly surface mass changes with mostly geographic corrections applied to analyze changes in mass in the Earth's hydrologic, cryospheric, and oceanographic components. To go from that to groundwater change over the last 2 decades over a particular area, or to be able to produce kind of use MDVI to produce kind of the presence of cropland over that same period, the jump from across that chasm is not insignificant. And so there's this space that's created where there's this trusted broker that lives there. And sometimes that trusted broker is an outside organization, and sometimes it's your internal team, depending on who you are as a user. But there's this trusted broker role that has to fit in there, that has to understand this. And their job is really to kind of bridge between the trusted data and the end user domain space that this needs to get into. So they act as this intermediary, and there's a whole set of trust that needs to get put around them. Right? There's proven track record with established trust. So what I want to kind of point out is that we talk about trusted data, but I want to make sure we avoid getting into any kind of false dichotomy or this like artificial binary sense of trust. Trust that exists along a spectrum. You could trust somebody to deliver a package to your front door. Are you willing to give them the key and ask them to just go ahead and drop it off in your kitchen? Would you trust them to take care of your plants? Would you trust them to take care of your kids, right? There's this spectrum of trust that exists. And how do we capture that? And on the data side, we have this idea of kind of operational readiness levels, 1 through 4, but there's a whole other space to live in, to talk about here when we talk about this trusted broker. And then it applies to tooling as well. And so some ways we can get at that is we talk about, kind of open source tooling. And I know I'm preaching to the choir to some extent around open sourcing, but open sourcing goes in both directions. By leveraging open source, these trusted data brokers get to take advantage of all of the energy, all of the effort, the wisdom and the knowledge and the techniques that have been put out there, made available and validated in these tools. You can bring those in and take advantage of those. And the flip side is true as well. When you put your stuff out there, then you get another set of eyes on them. You get people who can help raise concerns or identify it, vet your algorithms, vet your methods, and have those conversations. Now, I work for a private company. I understand that this is a public-private partnership piece. I understand the need of, I understand the pieces of needing to keep certain things internal and the drive for those things. But there's a trust component when that happens, and kind of how do you get around that? And then we get to the last one. We talk about the trusted user, and for that one, I actually want to step back, and we're talking about this is disaster response, right? And I'm talking about kind of preparing and collecting data for disaster response scenarios, particularly in the time of COVID. And so I want to put you in that headspace, right? This is what we're talking about. So if you've seen my talk on the California campfire, this is that, right? So it's the California campfire, 7 a.m., the alert goes off, 8 a.m. on the radio, the fire's everywhere, right? This is what at 7:30 in the morning, this alert goes out, evacuation area relatively contained around Polga. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, there's 8,000 acres have burned. It's 0% contained. That's the footprint of DC sitting inside of that fire. Right. In that first day, 5,000 acres burn in the first 3 hours, 70,000 burn in the first 24. There's 2,300 people on the scene, and the search and rescue team is getting their GIS efforts underway at 9 p.m. that night. So 14 hours after that initial, this whole thing started, is when they're getting their GIS efforts underway. So those first 24 hours consist of trying to contain the fire, evacuations of people and animals, traffic management, search and rescue operations, and public communication. Now, take all of those things that are going on. This is what this group is dealing with and coordinating, 2,300 people involved in this effort, and now drop COVID in the middle of this, right? You're now, are you socially distanced? You've got people who are quarantining. So the number of people, when you do an evacuation, it's a whole shift in kind of what that world looks like, plus maintaining the safety of the people involved on both sides, right? The first responders as well as the individuals that are, and where do you put them? How do you put them somewhere? This whole problem just got exponentially harder. And there's even just these like kind of bizarre anecdotes. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a news report in Australia. The police are going kind of door to door to remind people of stay-at-home orders and whatnot. And they're running into a problem where people are answering the door naked, like they're just not putting on clothes because they're home. And so why bother? So like this is the kind of like bizarre. In the first session we talked about kind of bizarre cascading effects, that start to happen. So for them, knowledge is key, right? Everything we can give them and get them information, that dramatically helps their situation. And what they have in the search and rescue team that we talked to, what they convey to us is we get 15 minutes to do that. Like if you can't give them meaningful information in 15 minutes, if they can't understand what you're presenting to them, how to use the tool you just showed them, if it's not conveyed in 15 minutes, the cost is too high. They can't do it. All right, so I'm saying that to frame a discussion around use case tolerances. And I think this is something that we don't talk quite enough about. In the first part of this session, we talked about use cases. We brought up the idea of use cases and kind of identifying these use cases and what data can support these use cases. There's another component of this, what I would consider use case tolerances. So if you look at some of these use cases, I'll just take some examples, right? Fire response, flood response, search and rescue, earthquake, put them in a COVID-19 scenario, people quarantining. What are the use case tolerances for a particular use case, particular job that and do we know those? And do we all agree on what those are? So to give you some examples, what happens if in the course of getting somebody data, we introduce errors during processing, right? If we process some data. And so what I mean by that is, let's say we fly a drone flight. We do a great job stitching this thing together. We've got this beautiful mosaic image. We have current data, but we've geolocated it off by 10 feet. Does that matter? What if we're off by 10 meters? Does that matter? What if we're off by a kilometer? Right? At what point does that become a problem to you? What point in your use case does being off by 10 meters versus a kilometer or whatever, what point does that matter? Another example, what if we fly and we create digital surface models, right? And we're doing elevation, right? We're looking for collapsed roofs. Or we fly a FLIR instrument and we're looking for hotspots. What if we have a 10% false positive rate? Is that catastrophic for you? What if it's 50%? What if it's 100%? When does this cross some threshold for you where it's a problem? Looking at another source of issues, what if the errors are actually because of the data themselves? What if it's coming from the data, the way that it's actually captured? So to give you an example of what I'm talking about here, here's a top-down view. This is from SpaceNet. They do machine learning training or machine learning competitions where you build models, train models, and then they compete. This is a top-down view. So let's say we train on this and we do building detection, right? Or we do route prediction, which is what this picture is actually showing. Here's another image that they used, and this is an off-nadir image, right? So the buildings have a slant to them. This wreaks havoc on a lot of the models that were built. So you increase your error rate significantly. But by being willing to use an off-nadir image, I may dramatically increase my repeat rate or my revisit time, because I can leverage multiple instruments or multiple satellites. I may be able to get lower latency because I can pick up satellites that are passing nearby, but it's an off-nadir image. At what point does that data cross into it's introduced too much error? And that's going to vary, right? What about using proxies? We've talked about proxies, right? Here's a screenshot of, you may have seen this one, this made the rounds a while ago, but this is cell phone data, so anonymized cell phone data showing what happened after spring break, tracking phones that were just in Fort Lauderdale. So this was, so if you watch, there's a whole video attached to this. If you watch the video, they zoom in on Fort Lauderdale, they select a handful of anonymized cell phone data, and then they watch that propagate out across the country as everybody goes home from spring break. This is a proxy, right? It's a proxy for transmission vectors and for people movement. Does that work for you? Then one of the hardest ones, I think, is what happens when we learn more, we have better data, we violate some assumptions, or we just straight up actively work to change the situation. We change the environment around it. This is a screenshot from COVID death projections. This is the end of March, projecting out to April 4th, and the number projected was 82,000. This is the one on the right is the current projection, giving the most recent information, projecting out to April 4th. If you look down on the number in the box there, and it's 154,000. So what happens if we get it wrong? Or even if we don't get it wrong, but our knowledge changes? Does this undermine the message? Does this undermine the trust? Is the trade-off worth it? And what I'm going to suggest is that for any given use case, I think we have to be talking about what is the cost of a data vacuum versus what is the cost of being wrong? And at what point are we actually wrong? What tolerances can a particular use case handle before we become sufficiently wrong or sufficiently off? And does it matter in a direction? And I don't think there's absolutely not a single answer for all use cases. It's going to vary by use cases. But I'm not even sure that there's a right answer for a given use case as much as a conscious and deliberate trade of saying these are the consequences of it and I've got to mitigate that. There's a risk introduced by this, and how do we deal with this from a risk mitigation perspective? So that brings me back to this trusted user idea. For a trusted user, we need to know what are the use case tolerances. The user needs to know what are the use case tolerances. What level of accuracy is needed? What margin of error is accepted? Does that margin of error need to be biased in a particular direction? So for example, do I need to know the worst case scenario? I don't care if we're off by 50%, but we got to be off by 50% in this direction only. Don't underestimate something, or whatever the case may be. Are there environmental constraints around this use case? So for example, that screenshot there, that's called a snow cone. The AWS snow cone is the new snow device. If you've ever seen the Snowball Edges, right, this is the new one, right? It's to say man portable is an understatement, right? It's small. It's a little bit bigger than an actual Kindle, built-in battery, the whole deal. But obviously has smaller compute, smaller storage. But if we have this in the field and we're responding, and we could fly a drone right then, stitch that imagery together and present it to somebody, but it may not be geolocated exactly right. Is that enough to be able to deploy a boat to go rescue somebody sitting trapped on their roofs in a flood situation? Is that enough can we get close enough? And what does that constraint mean for what we do? And a lot of times this trade comes down to speed versus quality. How fast can you get me the information, and what am I trading to get it that quickly? And that might be a perfectly acceptable trade if we have trust through that entire chain, including from the user and the underlying trusted broker. That's my talk. Thank you, Dave.
Dan, that's great. Thank you. Boy, so much to think about. And we've had a lot of comments about your presentation, high energy, good talk. And I want to have you stand by so we can have more questions. And I'm going to let Karen introduce me as the final speaker, and then we can get right into our discussion.
And Dan, you might have to stop sharing.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are collecting questions and comments in the chat, so please continue doing that. So our final talk then is my terrific co-chair for the disasters cluster, and also the CEO of Storm Center Communications. So Dave is going to talk to us about data access and synchronization across platforms, also agencies, the private sector, the use of ORLs, and trusted information exchange. So take it away, Dave.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Boy, it's been a great series of presentations. And what I'd like to talk about here over the next few minutes is how we're accelerating this trusted science data geospatially, but also including images and video into operational decision-making environments. We were talking a lot over the last hour and a half, a couple of hours here, about putting data from a research area into operations. And we're doing work with the NOAA JPSS program, and we were asked to do a rapid response call for the National Weather Service up in Alaska. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I wanted to show a little bit of detail about this, and hopefully, actually, I'm going to play a little video. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. As a matter of fact, I don't know if, let me just check real
Dave,
quick. Yes.
If you stop sharing, and then when you are going to share again, there's a checkbox at the bottom that says like use computer audio or something like that if it has audio.
Got it. Thanks. I was looking for that option. I appreciate that. Thanks, Aaron. So here we go. This is a rapid response effort that we were called into up in Alaska. And just to set the stage, the Weather Service in Alaska, they fly airplanes, and a lot of meteorologists or hydrologists go into these airplanes to observe the rivers. And it's very important to observe that river ice breakup because it's a cause of flooding. This is a little short video from Jessica Cherry talking about what that problem is about.
Alaska's #1 natural hazard is ice jam flooding in the communities along rivers. Floods can come in and wipe out entire villages. We think the work that we're doing is really important to people's lives and for general safety. I'm Dr. Jessica Cherry. I'm a senior hydrologist at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center.
And Jessica in the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, along with other hydrologists, they have to go up in these planes at times. And because of COVID, they were really concerned, and NOAA safety rules, they were really concerned about getting up in those airplanes. So they had to mobilize folks on the ground and ask the Civil Air Patrol and others with airplanes in Alaska to do observations for them and get that data and information back into a location where they could then access that data. So they rely on numerous data sets to access that flooding threat. Satellite data shows a snapshot in time, so it's great to have satellite data and satellite imagery, but making their program Riverwatch accessible and activating it and making sure it's continuing year after year is critical to show the motion of that ice. And so a lot of these data sets are in disparate locations. They put them in different Google Drives or collect them in different websites and things like that, and in different formats. So here's the real kicker. The amount of time that a hydrologist spends trying to take these pictures and images and correlate them to satellite images taken closely near the same time, they spend about 40 to 45% of their job just looking for data. That's 40 to 45%. And I keep thinking about the plenary talk this morning about cloud, activating cloud work and taking researching science data from 10% to 90% or 80%, which is what the cloud can really activate. But when you think about how much time is being spent, it's pretty mind-boggling. So the challenge that we addressed was, how do we deliver the right information to the right person at the right time so these responders can take appropriate action? And so what we did in our approach is we accessed, as far as accessing the right information, we took VIIRS flood products from the JPSS program, Sentinel-1 radar data, and that radar data was from the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They're processing that. Citizen reports, images, and video. And we shared and integrated that data, both geospatial and non-geospatial data products, together into this collaborative common operating picture that I'll show you here in just a second. So here's an example. This is in Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada. Here on the left-hand side, you see a little dot. That's the location that this picture was taken. And what you see here is the VIIRS flood product produced by the JPSS program. And anywhere you see red is ice that's backed up in the river. So there's an ice jam and there's flooding that's going on. And so you see the picture here. The town has been flooded because of this ice backup. The ice jam is upriver here. And this was the worst flooding in more than 100 years, according to the local government there. So we took geospatially the satellite imagery, located the point of the picture, and you could click on that picture and see the flooding. So you're actually taking satellite imagery and being able to look at it from a video standpoint in real time. Now, we've been talking for the better part of a couple of hours, and you've heard the ORL model or ORL ranking level described. This is basically a decision tree that's evolving, which was put together by the All Hazardous Consortium, ESIP, part of the Disaster Life Cycle Cluster as well, and the utility industry, to understand what ORLs mean. So if you can answer all these questions, these are the first questions: trusted and vetted source, SSL, HTTPS, interoperability optimized, restoration, redundancy, backups, no downtime, change modifications issued, verified and tested data, metadata completeness. Then you become an ORL 1. Extent and latency for use cases is questionable for depending on what your use case is. And the resolutions, temporal, spectral, or spatial and spectral, all go into that as well. If you don't have certain things, then you become a ORL 2. If you don't have, if you have fewer of those things, an ORL 3, and so on to ORL 4. Basically, what the ORL decision tree is deciding is trying to give decision makers who have no experience with geospatial data an idea for whether they can trust it and it's applicable to their use case, and they can go on and make decisions, 30-second decisions based on that data. So what I want to do here is show you a demonstration. It's going to be, I'm going to share my screen as I'm doing here, but you can also connect to the website. And I'm going to show you this in GeoCollaborate, which is the technology that we put together to share data across disparate platforms. And you can take, I'm going to put this link into the chat. And so let me go into the chat here. Here's chat. And then I'm going to change the last thing here to follow. And you can click on that link. Whoops, I sent it privately to Eileen. I meant to send it to everyone. Let me go back to there and click follow. So you can click on that link and then turn GeoCollaborate on in the upper left-hand corner. And what will happen is these data sets up in Alaska will load into your device, into your tablet, into your computer in real time, and I can move my map and zoom in and zoom around, and your map and your data on that map will follow me in real time. So what we're looking at are the actual plane tracks that were flown to observe the river. I can click on a particular blue dot here and the image will show up. And it tells me how high the camera was, hence the plane, where they were located, and the direction that the camera was pointed. If you want to see a larger image, you can click on larger image and see that image. So what we're doing here is we're now correlating the pictures that were taken along the ice and the river to satellite imagery that can be accessed and displayed in real time. And one of the things that we did down here a little bit further is you see this area in green that's highlighted. You, with your instance that you're following, can actually click on this green area as well. And what that does is it actually did a real-time query from the Socioeconomic Data Access Center, the CDAC at Columbia University, and pulled out the population in this area that I drew. And so that data and information is immediately available to all of the followers in real time as well. And so this enabled the Weather Service in Fairbanks and and Anchorage, Alaska, to be on the same map at the same time, looking at the same data, so they could talk about certain areas of flooding in different parts of the state. And the last thing that I'm going to show here is are these yellow dots. These yellow dots are areas where video was collected. And so if you click on that yellow dot, then you should be able to see a video pop up where you can press play. You can hear the helicopter, probably in the background. I'll turn that down a little bit and then make that full screen. So now we have non-geospatial data that's being shared in real-time geospatial formats, so we can put people on the same map and on the same video at the same time, so they're looking at the same location. Flood warnings were issued for this part of Alaska because of this video that was collected, and they could see that flood warning issued geospatially through GeoCollaborate. So I'll just get out of that, and I'll stop my sharing here in just a second. But those of you who are following, you can see that your map moves around in real time, and you may or may not even know where some of this data has come from. The one last thing that I'm going to show is river reports that were submitted from people living along the rivers, and those were displayed in purple. And so if you click on those river notes, that was harvested from a separate website, pulled in. An AI routine was run on the location to get the lat long, and then you see the actual river note and when it was updated. So this was a rapid prototype that we put together, and now we've done the hot wash, and we're going to make recommendations for how we can utilize real-time pictures and images taken and geospatially located, so we can start to build crowdsourcing and other trusted data into a real-time collaborative environment that can be shared across many pictures and platforms. So I'm just going to stop there so we can open this up to everybody in these discussions. And we also want to take data such as drone data, images, video, things like that, and share that into GeoCollaborate so we can start to be innovative with that kind of information. So I will stop sharing my screen. You can just close your browser for the GeoCollaborate session, and then that will be over. and then we can start up our conversation. The one thing that I do want to show, and I am going to share my screen again, is that we're in the in this session. You know how up at the top we have the notes in Google Docs, we have Sketch and 3 takeaways. We also have a Slido survey. And I would like to point you to some of these survey questions. We asked the first session these same things. So if you answered, you don't have to answer again. We're just trying to build up the number of responses that we get. If you go to the first question under Slido, you can click as to whether or not you've even heard of operational readiness levels, because we recently introduced them. Erin introduced them in a press release in Australia when she was down there for a data meeting for E2 SIP. And as you click on that, we'll go to the next session in just a few minutes. But I wanted to open up the floor. Karen, if you had any points that you wanted to make or topics that you wanted to bring up, and then I'd like to get into the chat so we can engage everybody in this conversation. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Dave.
So we are doing the Slido now, right?
Yes, and maybe I should share my screen so people can see it changing. But here's the Slido. We have 28 responses. Have you heard about ORLs? And we have 82% yes, 14% no, and some that are just saying I think I've heard about them, perhaps in some other discussions or conversations. And in just a couple of minutes, I'll go to the next poll question so we can get many responses as possible. The other thing I'd like to do is engage our speakers in some of these questions. Let me scroll back up here just a little bit. David Green had the question of how do we capture culture geospatially. I don't know if Bob Chen, I think Bob Downs is on the line. That seems to be something holding us back on decision making. So Bob, if you're still connected, do you have any feedback on that question?
Which Bob are you talking about?
Either you're the first one, and I know Bob Downs was on as well, but Bob Chen, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean it's culture, but it's also other societal arrangements. I mean, when people were talking on chat about trust, I think one of the interesting things that's worth talking about, and especially in a forum that's talking about public-private relationships and partnerships, is you know, how does our legal system, how does our normal ways of doing business work in this environment? When companies work with each other, they have contracts, and you know, people pay each other, and if you don't deliver, part of the trust equation is you can not pay or sue the group that didn't deliver. But when you have these more open-ended public-private arrangements and money's not being transferred, you don't have that mechanism to basically enforce trust. So, I mean, is that a cultural thing between, you know, the way the private sector works and the way academics work and the way governments work? You know, how do you cross that boundary of trust when you're not in a situation where there's a clear arrangement like a contract? Or do we need something equivalent to a contract that ensures that, you know, if somebody doesn't deliver today, they're not going to be used in the future or trusted in the future?
You know, I know some of the discussions that we've had in the past in the All Hazards Consortium and in the sensitive information sharing environment telecons that we have every Friday is, how do you build up trust, right? It's spending time with each other. It's getting to know people, and that ever so famous quote from Craig Fugate, you don't want to be exchanging business cards in the middle of a disaster. You want to build those relationships so then you can start to trust that person. And so there are what's evolving are data sharing agreements, MOUs, if you will, between organizations saying, you know what, if something happens, we're going to invoke our data sharing agreement, and we're going to share information with you, but you have agreed not to use it this way, or this way. But more importantly, you're going to trust the relationship between those two organizations and those two people specifically to get that information out. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on capturing that trust level, or really capturing culture? Bob, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so one way to look at this is that different groups, communities have different cultures. And so we could say, for instance, the scientific community has particular norms, practices, shared practices, et cetera. And there's a culture there. And if we know that the scientific community is located here or there, we can then think about where they are. However, in mentioning that, and you could do this with companies, et cetera, or different types of companies or industries, if you will. But having said that, I think it's important to say that there's some ethical implications here for privacy. We start looking into people's lives like that, individuals, and I think we need to be very careful.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I want to keep the conversation going by hitting on another question that came in here through the chat, and that was let's see here, was from Monica Youngman to everybody. In discussing what we can tolerate, understanding uncertainty and risk in data is challenging for users and can undermine trust. How much can the user understand? And if different users understand risks in different ways, which users do you prioritize? Do we have anybody that would like to comment on that question? Maybe Dan Pallone or Maggie, anybody else?
Oh man, in terms of what users do we prioritize? I shouldn't have come off mute.
I don't know. I think this is Nadine, Dave. Again, so these are difficult questions. I'm so glad Bob Chen is on the line to answer the cultural part. But say from the technical part, what we are trying to do, or we should try to aim for, and this is not just a question here. I hear it also just in general and data sources. If we can cater to everybody by having the right provenance, by having the right metadata, I hate to go back to that, so that you can get the fit for your use as needed. Again, you can do this from the technical perspective. It doesn't help you prioritize, but I'm saying you can at least, when you present the information, the user can figure out what to get. And maybe we don't prioritize because it's a different use case and it's a different combination of things that need to happen. Yeah. But they can run with it themselves. So each community can run with it without us or anybody having to actually prioritize.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I would. I'm sorry, Dave.
No, go, Dan. Sure.
I think that's where I would go to. I think there's kind of different aspects of this. I don't think there's a single right answer, but there's a policy level prioritization kind of on the public side in terms of, what's the right, how do you prioritize, what is the prioritization criteria? And then on the private side, there's an economic component to it, for better or worse, but there is an economic component to it. There's a contractual component to it. And I think there's a specialization component too. I think that it would be difficult for any single entity to try to prioritize kind of all the verticals or all the use cases. But I think there's places where you can bring maximum value and then partner with, whether it's another private organization, another commercial, or public, or whatever the right combination is, to kind of go after the bigger picture piece that you're trying to address. It's not a great answer, but I don't think there's a single answer here.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
This is Eileen Shea. Could I just add on to what Dan said?
Sure.
At least in the worlds in which I've worked, weather, climate, and disaster management, the answer really isn't simple. The answer is, what's the problem you're trying to address? And in the context of the problem you're trying to address or solve, you'll be able to identify who the high priority customers are. Who are the communities? And it's problem specific. It's not ever going to be the same. It's always going to be based on the problem you're trying to solve and where you are trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eileen. And it also comes down to what Tom Moran was talking about in the previous session too, about use cases. You take things from a use case approach, and all of a sudden you have other data sets that you might need to solve that use case and address that use case, whereas other ones may not require that type of data, whether it's timeliness resolution or whatever. And Eileen, it's funny because you chimed in right when I was going to say that you also asked and thanked Dan during his presentation for bringing up trusted information brokers. And so people, groups, and institutions who are trusted on both sides of the chain. And that wasn't a question, but a statement, saying, we have people on both sides. And when you have people that trust each other on both sides and have data and information to offer, all of a sudden that data turns into knowledge, right? This is what David Green was talking about in the previous session, where sharing data isn't the same thing as sharing knowledge. And one really important piece of information we had come up actually in our sensitive information sharing environment telecon last week came from a utility, and that utility brought up this question, and I'd like to pose it to the speakers and all of you participating as well. They were a bit uncomfortable in calling this data sharing, because they were thinking that if you talk about data sharing between two private sector organizations, their attorneys are going to shut it down and say, we are not going to share this data. However, if you call it a collaboration between organizations, and perhaps we even introduce what David talked about, knowledge sharing, then it takes it away from actually thinking that you're handing over data into somebody else's hands. And one of the things that we've seen, like with GeoCollaborate, is when you share data into other devices, like we did with this example, you're not taking possession of that data. You're able to interact with it, but you can't save it anywhere. It doesn't reside on your system anywhere except in the cache. And then when you close the browser, it's gone. So where is the line between, how we can really spread this out, Nadine, what you were talking about, and getting this out to more people and organizations that aren't GIS friendly, savvy, to put this data to work in a way in which we're sharing our knowledge as opposed to data sharing. Does that make a difference? I see a lot of wheels turning in your head.
This is Rama.
Rama, yes.
Yeah, I don't see a serious distinction between knowledge sharing and data sharing in terms of terminology. I think knowledge sharing has the same proprietary implications as data sharing.
Mm-hmm. That's great feedback. That's important feedback as well. I think, perhaps on the legal side, attorneys are saying data, that's something I can hold and store and keep. and we're not going to be sharing data between private sector companies. But if you're sharing knowledge, like, hey, we know something is happening over here, this could help the broader community, like don't drive that down this road because it's washed out. You know, something like sharing that across is something that will help all organizations. So maybe in our thought process, we can think about how the data leads to knowledge, can lead to better decision making, and how to really merge those together so it's supported by every organization.
You know, another way to look at it, Dave, is it's shared knowledge development. In other words, it's collaboration to develop knowledge that builds on information or data that everybody has. But it's not the fact that you're sharing, it's the fact that you're developing something better by bringing these different sources of data together.
Right.
I think collaboration is a much better term.
Collaboration is a good term. Is a good term. Bob, what were you going to say? You appeared.
Well, yeah, I appeared. Similarly, I mean, I think it's the prior collaboration, the development of a community, and then if it chooses to share data, whatever level it's comfortable with, share knowledge, share tools, it comes from having that prior arrangement, prior trust. You know, and I threw in the chat, you know, what I was observing with the All Hazards Consortium, where these companies had a history of sharing resources and, you know, getting help from each other, even though they're private companies. But then you look at what happened in the healthcare field, and states and medical people and hospitals didn't have arrangements to, you know, take turns with intubation, you know,
ventilators and
PPE and all that sort of thing. And it was just a mess because people didn't have the wherewithal to do a good job. And then the one group that was supposed to step in, namely FEMA and the federal government with, you know, the shared resources, they didn't do their job. And so everybody was stuck because they didn't have these arrangements, and they were competing with each other and not collaborating. So I think there's some stark lessons of what to do and what not to do and what to prepare for. And certainly the All Hazards is a really good example where they were looking ahead. I mean, this example that Tom showed, which I hadn't seen before, of them getting their vendors for PPE together, you know, was great. It was a big competitive advantage, I'm sure.
You know, this is a great discussion and conversation. And, you know, as the disaster lifecycle cluster, Karen and I are always looking for, you know, your direction in where we should go next with the disaster lifecycle cluster. And so not that we're giving up what we've worked on before, but we still want to do a check on whether we're headed down the road that everybody thinks we should be. So I've updated the Slido poll. If you go back to that link, that Slido poll, and answer those questions, where you think we should head, then we can gather more of that input. You may have answered it from the previous session. If you haven't, please try to answer it. And Steve, I saw you pop in. I was wondering if you had something that you wanted to add.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, just a couple of thoughts. One consideration, I think, should be data rights. And, you know, obviously some data are explicitly placed in the public domain, and there's the various mechanisms, you know, for essentially opening up rights to particular data sets. So to be kind of cognizant of, you know, and many of the government data sets are, you know, public domain data where sharing the data shouldn't be an issue. But when you're dealing with non-governmental data, I think a point that I saw Bob make in the chat, I think is relevant. You know, Bob, you mentioned contracts, but yeah, you may need legally at least sort of vetted agreements among parties where you're dealing with, quasi-proprietary data that you're trying to share for, hopefully some good purpose. And my sense is that the utilities seem to be maybe not explicitly with data, but my impression from previous sessions is that they're kind of doing that, and they have their whole mutual aid framework, right? And it's understood that that's beneficial to everybody to have mutual aid. But it may well be that there does need to be some amount of lawyer's game where lawyers are looking and basically saying, yeah, you're not going to get into antitrust problems here when you're dealing with certain types of data, that there's a desire to share them, there's benefits to sharing them, but you don't want to get bitten in the butt because you shared data.
So can I build on this, Steve? Because I like this concept of contracts and data, and maybe the contract is not you give me the data, the contract is you send me a trigger for when there's some significant concentration or there's a problem or an alert, rather than send me the whole data. And these are the contracts, and maybe the lawyers are more comfortable because then you're actually not sending the data, you're saying, I got an issue, flood alert or possible flood alert, right? Back to Dave's scenario, for example, in Alaska. Maybe the contracts are that way when there's no need to actually send the whole data.
Right.
I mean, I remember we had an issue when I was working for EPA where there was a mutual desire. EPA hoped to get data from the NatureServe organization about species occurrences, but NatureServe's view was, no, we're not going to give you the data, but we're willing to enter into almost like a quasi-licensing agreement with you, EPA, where we'll stand up a service, and you can essentially hit our, I'm simplifying, but hit our API, so it's sort of like sharing the data, but everyone was comfortable, including the lawyers, with the mechanism that was established. But in that case, there did need to be a mechanism. And in a perfect world, I'd prefer that everybody shares data with everybody, whenever possible. And so I hate to bring up lawyers, but sometimes you do need to involve them.
Sure. Well, I want to let everyone know that we're at our time right now. It's 5:30 Eastern time. This has been a terrific discussion. I want to continue it. Those of you who have to drop off, we're still recording, but I did want to get to this one question from Karen Moe, and that was, and we've talked about this in the past within the disaster lifecycle cluster, and that is how significant is terminology in the trust flow from data to broker to decision maker. For example, in bridging terms from science measurement to decision support data. We're getting into, what do we call certain data products and things like that? How important is that? Has anybody come across those challenges? And Karen, I see you popped in there. And so if you want to, say anything else about that, it'd be great. You're muted.
You're muted.
Karen. You're muted. I just cannot read lips in these small boxes.
Okay. It was 2 years ago in an ESIP meeting, summer meeting, that we really tried to use some tools to extract terminology from different communities through their documentation, and just never was able to accomplish that little task. But since that time, I had noticed in a couple of meetings that I'd gone to that, some people kind of throw their hands up and say, well, we're just not going to get there. The language is too diverse. And other people say, well, I don't know, maybe we can get some terms. And if you look at what NOAA has done with they're still confusing, but watches and warnings, in ways that they reach out to the public, terminology gets is very significant. So is there a way of solving that conundrum, for the wide variety of data and applications and use that we have, or at least for some subset of it?
Karen, one of the thoughts that I had, and I've experienced this within NOAA, working with NOAA, is that they've really built upon the social sciences, and they're getting a lot of social scientists involved in understanding the terminology that the Weather Service uses to issue watches and warnings. And I'm wondering if we might be able to influence a little bit. I'm co-chair of the Weather Ready Nation Symposium for AMS. And the two other co-chairs are senior Weather Service folks. But if we couldn't, suggest maybe a way to use social science to understand that terminology in the framework of using research data and conveying information, and perhaps they might have an idea from the social science world about some sort of mapping between terms. I don't know if that's a way to definitely go, but it could be something that they might be interested in.
Right. I think it definitely is a human-oriented problem.
Yeah. Anybody else have any input with regard to terminology?
I think I was just going to say the non-human part, the technical part again, because I think we're making a lot of advances, and it's not a problem only here, right? There are other domains that are having similar problems, but this is where we're really trying to push on this linked data and a little bit of artificial intelligence, machine learning. Even within OGC, we're using it to connect, the terms that we usually use for, vector or polygon, all the way up to, what's the semantics and all of this. So, and I think this is becoming more mature. We're not there yet, but, I think between the social science, and us being domain experts, right, and the technology helping, we're getting there. It's worth digging deeper, at least.
Well, that's great, Nadine. That means a lot coming from you as well. And I'd just like to wrap up this session. We're 5 minutes over, but it's really been awesome engaging everybody. Appreciate all the discussions back and forth in the chat. Nadine, thank you so much for joining us. Maggie, thank you for your presentations. We definitely want to keep posted on the projects that NASA's funding and you're working with to put some of that data to use and maybe bring those products in front of decision makers, right? That's what the All Hazardous Consortium really wants to do. The disaster lifecycle cluster, very interested in following data from its collection to products to how it's used. And Dan, really great opportunity to speak to us and bring up that whole trusted data broker idea, and certainly love your energy. So Karen and I, and maybe Aaron, will hang for a couple more minutes if anybody wants to discuss anything else. Aaron, I think you can stop the recording. And